Councilmember Cottle?
Here.
Councilmember Graham?
Here.
Councilmember Schmidt?
Here.
Councilmember Crafton?
Yours working?
Mine's not working,
You're
but
here.
I'm here.
He's here. Councilmember Vlock?
Mine's not working.
Here.
Councilmember Rubio?
Here.
You do have a quorum, Madam Mayor. All council members are present with us in chambers, and we'll be doing some mic swap outs, so thank you.
Elena set it up that way.
Heard you off.
You're gonna have to reschedule.
It's working.
Y'all are out of luck.
Dang it. Did my plan fail? It's successful, actually.
I'm gonna start the meeting off with recess.
I think it's working. We're good.
Yours
Okay.
working?
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Crafton, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item of business is the approval of the agenda. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Next is public participation. It's a time for members of the public to share their views with the council. This is not a question and answer period or a time for dialogue. Speakers may be referred to administration, or issues raised may be taken under advisement by the council or administration. Okay, Mr. Clapperidge, you're up first.
Mayor?
Please come forward and begin by stating your first and last name, and if you are a city resident.
Good evening. My first and last name is John Clapperick, and I and my family have been paying Wasilla City sales tax since its inception, over 33 years, at approximately $100,000 worth of purchases a year, puts us at nearly $100,000 investment. And my businesses in Wasilla charge our customers Wasilla City sales tax, even if they're in Anchorage, Chicago, or Seattle, because I deliver the services here. And I say that to hopefully warrant that I'm an engaged constituent. I was reminded by a city council member not too long ago, I wish you were a resident of Wasilla. We would give it more weight and more attention. And I see tonight here yet, 2026, are you a resident? And it makes me feel like, sorry, you just don't quite make the grade of being important. So next, I want to congratulate you on a great parade on the 4th of July. And the mayor's entrance was chosen best of show #1. Congratulations. It was a great event. I'm here tonight, though, to advocate for your sales staff, businesses within the city that collect the city sales tax. And Title 16 has been one of the most oppressive, blanketed, inappropriate documents in the history of the city, according to many, many businesses. I don't have time to address 647 pages in a minute, but the point is, everything, landscape, a site plan isn't even accepted unless it's got a $10,000 landscape architect stamp on it. And then every tree and bush and shrub and tree plant, where its pedigree, where it comes from. An island every 3 spaces. I ask, why an island every 3 spaces? Well, because they're not going to be need parking. This is designed for a fictitious walk-to-work community, Wasilla, Alaska. So, but what frustrates us most is the inaction by the council. You have meetings after meetings, quarter after quarter, month after month. Interesting. Okay, well, let's postpone it. Okay, amendment comes up the next meeting. Let's think about that. Oh, a work session. Let's all meet and have coffee and donuts and work on it. And it's going on month after month after month after month and year after year. We just want to know whether there is light at the end of the tunnel or if that's a freight train still coming at us. Can this be repealed and rejected tonight once and for all? And what about downtown overlay? Whoa, if you want to do business downtown, don't even think of it. So we highly advocate to repeal Title 16 tonight. Thank you.
And next is Bethany Follett.
My name is Bethany Buckingham Follett, Wasilla Museum Curator, City of Wasilla Emergency Public Information Officer, and captaining the Alaska State Defense Force. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm here tonight to honor and thank our city employees and community members for their hard work and dedication to the annual City of Wasilla 4th of July Parade. It takes a village to make an event like this happen. Thank you, Mayor Ledford, for supporting your staff throughout this event. Thank you to Jess and the Parks and Maintenance staff, Adia, Logan, Ethan, Tim, and Al, and the summer temps who designed and constructed the mayor's float and helped with parade logistics. Thank you to Linda and Katie in Finance for volunteer check-in and float wrangling. Tia in Public Works and her husband for float check-in, Melissa in Finance and her daughter, and Andrew in IT for candy distribution. Thank you to Megan, the museum aide, and Diane, Wasilla Library for float numbering and corralling. Thank you to the Temp Museum crew for printing and organizing parade items. Thank you to Crystal for swag and coordinating the flyers with the Wasilla Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to Tammy and Scott at the Menard for coordinating the theme and banners and initial planning. Thank you to Lisa for our emergency action plan, to MatCom for dispatch support. Thank you to Yana and HR and her sister for all the photos. Thank you to Brigadier General Brown and his staff at the Alaska State Defense Force for traffic management, and Dr. David Martin and Kings Chapel CERT also for traffic management. Thank you to Eddie Maxwell at Q99 for MC, and Paula Nance and the Sertoma crew for judging. Thank you to Bill Morrow and the Red Cross, who, while helping our neighbors to the north open 2 shelters for wildfire evacuees, still found volunteers in time to support the parade with water stations and first aid assistance. Thank you to Chief and Wasilla PD and the Mat-Su Law Enforcement Explorers for traffic and crowd management. Thank you to Amanda Graham, WPD, for traffic notifications and alerts. Thank you to Stacy and Northern Dame for the barricade setup and teardown. Thank you to Jesse and the Mat-Su Central Fire, Michael and Westlakes Fire, Sparky and the Mat-Su Borough EMS for all the bells and whistles. Thank you to Aviva and the National Weather Service Anchorage for providing up-to-date reports about the weather to help us plan and prepare. Thank you to Renee and the Mat-Su Borough School District for the Wasilla High School parking lot, to Larissa at Rent-A-Can for the bathrooms. Thank you to Kylie at Combs Insurance and Nick at the State of Alaska DOT. Thank you to Make a Scene for our new parade map. Thank you to all of our downtown businesses and residents for understanding and supporting the new parade route. Thank you to everyone who volunteered your time away from family and friends during this holiday to join us in Wasilla. I know there are many that I am missing, but thank you, and know that from the bottom of my heart, we could not host a successful parade without your time and dedication to make it happen. Lastly, I would like to remind everyone that next year is the 250th or semi-quincentennial anniversary of the United States, so start planning for Saturday, July 4th, 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you, Bethany. And Bethany worked really hard on this parade to make it happen. And again, thank you. And now, Eric, and I want to tempt your last name because I'll butcher it.
Well, it's a good time to learn. Villasenor. Villa Senor.
Villasenor? Okay.
So I spoke here last week. I had a pre-written dialogue, and I'm not going to read from it again, but essentially this is about ordinance serial number 2514. I have these plans to build on my single-family home residential lot. I own about an acre, and a beautiful house that my wife has just made incredible. I take very little credit for what she's done. And we paid off the house recently, and so now I'm looking to do something great. And what I want to do is I want to build a small unit toward the back of my property with ADA compliance in mind, so that I can help facilitate a place for elderly to live. I want to charge a minimum amount, and I want to have basically reliable income as well. And then one day when my mom needs somewhere to live, she can move into that space as well. As the way I understand it, with the zoning laws as they are now, I can't build on my property the way that I want to and rent it out long-term even. I know there's a lot of changes for short-term. I just got that packet. It is enormous. I haven't even combed through it all. Most of it's like definitions and stuff. I'll probably try to get to it over the week or something. But as the way I understand it right now, it's just not possible to do what I want to do and have it be permitted. And I'd like to follow the law. So I'm here tonight in hopeful conclusion of this measure, so that I can move forward with the plans that I want to do and hopefully provide another space for the community to rent out an affordable unit. I got a little bit of time left. I might as well tell you a little bit more about my plans. The area that would be occupied, it would be like 800 square foot of house, maybe 2 bedrooms, 1 for a caregiver, 1 for the occupant. I want to allow pets like 1 small dog or a cat, and I want to fence in the entire back because I work with the elderly quite often and they love their little dogs or their cats. And I just can't imagine being like a 70 or 75-year-old man or woman and all I've got is my little dog or my little cat, and I can't find a place to live because they won't take cats or dogs. I see this quite often in my line of work. I'm a care coordinator for the Medicaid waiver program. See lots of elderly people go into assisted living, but a lot of times they try to stay in their own homes. Anyway, looks like I got about 10 seconds left. Thank you for your time, everybody. I hope that what I've said has some kind of impact on your guys' decision. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now close persons to be heard, and we are now at unfinished business. Madam Clerk, please read the item by title.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ordinance serial number 2514, repealing and reenacting Wasilla Municipal Code Title 16 Land Development Code to substantially change the uses permitted in each zoning district, the review, enforcement, and permitting procedures, the planned unit development, landscaping, parking, conditional use and variance procedures, and the design standards imposed in the city.
Okay, the main motion to adopt ordinance serial number 2514 is pending. Is there discussion or are there amendments to the ordinance?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. I think it might behoove the council, instead of just trying to individually take the amendments, if we did it like we did the budget, where we jump into committee of the whole, run down the list of amendments, gives us a chance to free-flowingly have the conversation, and then we jumped out of committee of the whole, and then we can move which amendments we want or not move which ones we do. The amendments I have, some of them, again, I did without having the ability to fully ask questions and fully flesh out the thoughts on them, so I'd be curious to see if they're even interest in them, so that's why I'd like to talk them through like we did with the budget amendments as well, where we'll just go through them all, see how they're fleshed out, and then come out and move them again. So with that, Madam Mayor, I'd like to move into committee of the whole.
Is there a second to the motion?
Rubio seconds.
It has been made by Crafton and seconded by Rubio to move into committee of the whole. Is there discussion? Hearing none, is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, we are in committee of the whole at 6:14. And on the amendments, on page 4 of 647, amendment number A-1. Is there discussion?
Sorry, Mayor, I'm trying to make sure I'm following where you're looking here. You said page 4?
Page 4 of 647. Or page 2 of 7.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're following along on the exhibits.
Mayor, if it's helpful, I can speak to these exhibits.
Absolutely.
So the first, the amendment number A1, and so you have a memo that sort of identifies the proposed amendments. These amendments have resulted from discussions of council and questions. I believe there was a question for us regarding what about just removing the definition of family? I'm not sure if council remembers that. That was I think 2 meetings ago. And my initial response was, well, we worked on this language together for our council. Let's, I think that it is appropriate. When we got out of the meeting, I did ask my colleague Eric Nissen to look into the constitutionality of that, if we were really, if we were on the precipice of having a problem later on. And when he did look into that and we looked at the language, it then became our recommendation that you change it. We're just worried that while we have a livable document we are creating, it should be grounded in best practices now, and avoid that type of change later. So all that amendment number A1 does is it defines single family dwelling and multifamily dwelling, and it avoids having a definition for family. And so that we are using the terms, but one of the most important things it does that council really needs to consider is we went back to why we used the 8 individuals. And this was something that council and the commission, when acting as a joint commission, moved away from because of the fear that we would be inadvertently harming larger families that are more than 8 people. But when we go back and we look at that number, it was chosen or selected by the planning department. We see that number of people repeated in other jurisdictions. The concept being that it's really above that number where you start putting a more significant burden on the infrastructure. And by using a number, we are aligned with how we treat assisted living facilities, how we treat other motels, hotels, right? How we think and conceptualize the size and how many people are in a building. And by doing that, we are consistent throughout all of our definitions, which is what creates compliance with federal housing, with the Federal Housing Act for the city. Because once we start saying that certain types of persons are more okay in a space than other types of persons, then if you have an individual with a disability, that might be defined as somebody who has an alcohol disorder, or somebody who is incapacitated and uses a wheelchair. There's a large range of what falls within the definition of a person with a disability. So once we start trying to define what family is and start adding things like adoption and foster care and related by blood, all of those terms, we're really moving into a space where they don't work anymore for definition. They want to see this pragmatic number of bodies versus not number of bodies. So that is the reason for the proposed amendment. It aligns with law. It allows the city to remain compliant with law moving forward. The one issue, and I think this might be an issue for council to simply pay attention to the extent you end up with people running into the harm, where they have more than 8 people living in a facility. They are being prohibited from having a multifamily house because they have 10 people in the house instead of 8. In practice, I think that will be the time to revisit the definitions if there is a harm and we're seeing that harm. Because I think what most communities see is when you have a large family, this is not an area in which enforcement often delves. We do not go to people's homes and say, it looks like you have 10 people as opposed to 8 people in this house. Could you please prove your relationship? Right? So anyway, there is the explanation for amendment number A1. And I think, Mayor, would you like me to pause and then allow council to discuss the first amendment, or just go through all the amendments in
I
A?
think you need to pause and let them, if there's any discussion.
Okay.
Council. Holly, correct me if I'm wrong, so within A1, listed on pages 2 and 3 and for the public, then you have 1 through 8 for all the changes that relate to A1.
Yes, and those changes are like replacing the term dwelling unit with single-family dwelling, and the definition of assisted living facility.
Holly, turn your
Microphone,
mic on, please.
So I can read through those changes if need be, or I mean, the memo was in the packet, so it's also, I think, acceptable to rely on that.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you. Holly, in the, amendment number A1, it talks about, which can be found in Appendix A on line 415. Nowhere in the old table of contents or the new table of contents does it mention an appendix. What page are you referring to in this?
Oh, no, I think you just caught an error, Councilmember Graham. I think that's referring to Exhibit A, and I wrote appendix. Excuse me for that.
Okay,
But yes, you're right, there is no appendix.
okay, thank you, I was confused. So.
As always.
Well, no, that was confusing, so that makes sense.
Okay. Hearing no discussion, then we will move on to amendment number A2. Changing the definition of landscaping bed. Holly?
So this amendment stemmed from administration. One of the questions that, we was just trying to we talked about having this be easy to understand, and that sentence was not easy to understand. And so that was pre-existing, this is language that we've had, but this just sort of removes confusing language. So the remaining definition will simply be landscaping bed means an area in which landscaping treatment is planted or placed and may include mounds and berms. But previously, it had that part of the definition, right? It also stated that where only width is specified, a landscaping bed shall extend the full length of the property line along which it is required, exclusive of driveways and other ingress and egress openings. So this is, that question, is it going too far? One thing we're saying, at one point, we're just saying you need a landscaping bed and describing what that is. The next, we're describing exactly where the landscaping bed will be when it specifies width. So it's, of course, completely up to council what they want to do with this amendment, but the administration was trying to simplify and just sort of cut out some of that arguably over specificity.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will move on to amendment number A3. Removing the definition of single triangle from proposed section 16.70.015.
So this amendment, when I was reviewing the code in light of, this upcoming meeting, we generally did not change the signs chapter, right? And that was adopted in, I believe, 2017. We didn't really touch it. We didn't touch the definitions, in part because that is a more appropriate section or chapter to revisit after the comp plan has been updated. We don't want to change regulations regarding signs when our districts change completely, and maybe what you want to do with signs will change completely in those districts, right? So if you end up having a multi-density district that doesn't currently exist, that's going to impact signs. And so because it was fairly new, we didn't, and I know I'm telling council what they did, but that is just sort of a reminder, refresher, but that's where we went. But when I was reviewing it, I decided that I really would like council to consider taking out the definition of site triangle in the signs section. And the reason why is a site triangle is really a traffic component that exists more, it impacts a lot of other areas in the code. We already have that definition in our general definitions. We have a really clean simple definition in our general definitions, so I think it is appropriate to take it out so that there isn't any confusion. A lot of the other definitions under signs pertain simply to signs. So that is where that amendment comes from.
Mr. Graham?
Could you perhaps say what that definition is, since we're deleting this definition?
The
Or-
definition under general definition?
Right.
Yes. Here, I will have to, give me a moment and I will.
I'm not going anywhere.
Okay. Let's see. So sign, site triangle. Site triangle means, and I'm on page 30 of the packet, and page 21 of the, and it is a site triangle means a triangular shaped portion of land established at street intersections in which nothing is erected, placed, planted, or allowed to grow in such a manner as to limit or obstruct the sight distance of motorists entering or leaving the intersection.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Madam Attorney. I don't see a problem with the site triangle being more defined. You know, intersections of roadways are where the majority of accidents happen. And anything that you place in that site triangle limits the visibility. The site triangle as defined in, page 102 here, anything that you place in that site triangle limits the visibility and increases the possibility of something not being seen, which could be a child, it could be an animal, it could be a vehicle. Anything that limits that increases the probability of an accident there. So I would be in favor of a more well-defined site triangle. I mean, I wouldn't object to moving, lines 2551 through 2560 and replacing, lines 659 through 661. But I do think if we're clear about what you can do there and exactly where that triangle starts, it starts at the intersections of the right-of-way of those two, pathways, roadways, whatever we want to call it. I think unless there is something in state law that specifically defines a site triangle, I think that we should be fairly specific.
Okay, well, one thing I just want to make sure council understands, that's fine, you can choose to use the other definition or you can choose to keep them both. But remember, when we are more specific in our definition of site triangle, we are actually we are protecting less of what happens in a site triangle. Because if we're saying, this is basically everything around here that impairs your sight, then we are requiring more from the developers when it comes to protecting against impediments to the site triangle. So the more words we have, the more specific we are about where we draw those lines. That actually creates more risk that something will happen in that site triangle because it's slightly different than the way we've defined it, right? So the shorter definition is actually the more protective of activity within the site triangle. And Councilmember Graham, you may have meant that. I wanted to make sure it's clear because it's a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I would disagree with you. If you're gonna develop a piece of property that's at an intersection, safety needs to be one of the main concerns when it comes to that intersection. And so having a mound in a site triangle with a bush on top of it, or when that is just not very well defined, I mean, the definition, I think, helps protect the developer. It does create additional thought process for the developer where, you know, and his architect has to say, oh yeah, we can't place that, whatever it is, that impediment in the site triangle there. It doesn't require him to remove anything, you know, that's already there, but it does say, you know, do not develop anything inside that site triangle other that would impede, you know, visibility. I mean, if you're gonna have grass out there, that's great. If you're gonna have, you know, little, you know, 12-inch tall tree flowers or whatever, that's fine, but I don't see that it makes it less safe, I think was the word that you used. I don't see that. I don't see having it less defined as being more safe.
And so all I'm saying is, the definition that exists in the sign code provides a 25-foot measurement, at which point you are measuring from one place to the other within 25 feet. The definition in the general definition section is based on where you can actually see or not see. It's based on things that impede sight. And so when enforcing the code or when working with developers, you're really looking at what can you really see, where is that site, where is there interference with that site? So, you know, and that's all I'm saying. And so the broader definition holds them to a higher standard based on what is actually interfering with that site triangle. But whichever definition or both, this is not an issue that I think we're in a bad place if you keep both definitions. It was just proposed for clarity. And you can absolutely even swap out the definitions. That's another option. And so, you know, whatever council wants to do with that one. Unlike the first one that sort of deals with this element of constitutionality, this is just preference.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking at the two different definitions we have here, and they describe a few different things. I see where Mr. Graham is going, where the one on, if you were looking at the one at the general definition on page 21 of 152, and then on page 92 and 93 of 152 are where the two are, if you wanted to look at them side by side. The one in the sign section on page 92 actually describes the bounds, whereas on page 21 it just says a triangular area, basically, which doesn't really describe where it's at. It's almost like the two need to be pushed together. I don't feel like it's being more restrictive. I think it's just being clearer as to, hey, this is what we consider the site triangle. If it's not this area, then you're good to go. But I mean, that triangular shaped portion of land could be different depending on which side of the argument you want to be on. So I think actually saying, okay, this is what we're going to call the site triangle, it's from this point to this point to this one, and then back, makes more sense. So it almost seems, yes, we do need to remove it from signs and take that section of code and combine it with, or that definition and combine it with the general one. That's what it almost looks like would make more sense in my mind for this section.
So again, council can do whatever works for council. This definition that is proposed allows your administration to decide what the site triangle is, because site triangles, especially in places like Alaska, or where we're dealing with things that are impeding sight, it allows them the flexibility to make sure that they're protecting the actual site triangle, right? They're protecting that visibility. And so that's why it's as simple as possible and as clean as possible so that that can be defined. So if it does need to be a triangle, you know, so that is, but the bounds of that triangle will be based upon the impact on site. The administration will need to be prepared to say, this is the site triangle for, you know, we don't want to see development here and here. So it is, there's also that element, but it's designed to be more protective. If you guys want to merge them together, what I would recommend is to leave it as it is, and this is one of those things you can come back with a cleanup ordinance, or don't, I mean, I would not, right now, what is proposed here is what I find to be legally the best definition. I can change that definition to reflect what council wants, if there's a vote on the amendment, and then we can work on, but I need, on that language, but I need to figure out what the objective is, because legally speaking, this site triangle definition provides the most flexibility to ensure nothing happens in the site triangle. I can put 25 feet in here and create the bounds, right? But there's no reason to have this if we do that. So I think you would just go back to, because we will have defined the site triangle, so we don't need to have something that has a broad definition of the site triangle. So we could take, maybe there's parts of that second sentence, so I can bring something back to council if you want. But my biggest concern was maintaining 2 site triangle definitions in the code when site triangles are something that impact developers on a wider front. So we can.
Madam Mayor, if I could continue. I think it makes sense to have it defined in here. I mean, I like that. I mean, you kind of said the administration decides, so if we had a different administration come in, they now get to decide what's a site triangle. So if it's codified, it doesn't change what a site triangle is. I really think it's something that needs to be, this is the distance of how far a site triangle is supposed to be. I think that's the simplest way to do it. So I think at this point, we're probably bridging into the debate of it. So that's my thoughts on it, and I'll probably bring something back later at this point.
Bob?
Is this working?
There you go.
Test. Okay. Madam Mayor, through the chair here, so a site triangle has a general definition. If you walk into a pool hall, and you're talking a triangle, someone's gonna hold up the thing that racks the balls. So site triangle, general definition is you need it just to define it. When you get into signs and you start talking about that area, it's all defined by speed, stopping distance. So putting if you are on a 50-mile-an-hour road, you have more of a length of a site triangle. So there's an engineering component that is by the MUTSA, the Traffic Uniform Code, and the state code. So we review that in our review and then say, okay, that is good for a 25-mile-an-hour road, basically. So not every situation is ever just cut black and white. You have to figure it out by an equation, and that's based on speed.
Ms. Rubio?
Madam Mayor, thank you. So I do like the first one, less is more, for sure, because it doesn't leave it up to the administration deciding anything other than what's in their range. It's kind of goes back to, if you think about trees and shrubbery, why we changed things. It's because we didn't want so many regulations. Well, this, putting numbers on here, just as administration has said, you're narrowing every piece of property to whatever that may be. So you're putting numbers again where we're trying to make things less, and not in the sense of changing the feet of anything in that degree, but meaning we're not trying to entrap people into, I have to have 25 feet of this and this, because it's not up to them. It's up to what that triangle is. So I like less is more, because that allows administration to work with the business owner, whoever they're working with, the developer, to come up with a reasonable what works for that piece of property. Not in general just throwing out numbers to throw numbers, to make something longer and harder to read and understand.
Further discussion?
Madam Mayor. So, several years before I was on the city council, I sat on a sign commission, whatever, there was 10 or 11 of us that spent the whole summer, twice a week for a summer. I didn't fish the whole damn summer. I was quite upset, but I was younger then. Now I don't fish, so it doesn't matter. But and this was a huge issue for business owners. The people that were on the committee, I guess is what it was, the people that were on the committee, and Tina was the planner at the time. There was a lot of discussion about this. Obviously, business owners want you to come to their business, want you to spend money in your business, spend time at their business. So the specificity of it actually came out of the sign committee, 11 or 12 years ago, to talk about that. And then the second thing, one of the things that Public Works brought up was speed, and signs are all about speed. If you're going 40 miles an hour, how large do you need the letters to be able to, for the person to be able to read them? So the concept of the sight triangle being a variable size triangle was discussed, but then again, to make it simpler, to bring things into our code where you don't need a lawyer to go look up the state code to figure out how big the sight triangle is outside your law office, on a 25-mile-an-hour road versus maybe I'll build it on a 40-mile-an-hour road. That wasn't, the idea was simple, just go with 25 feet, which is, I believe, is the minimum distance at that time in state code. So I think we're actually giving a lot of flexibility by defining it. We're giving flexibility, and we're taking away what planning has said they don't want, is to have to interpret, Crystal says, maybe it ought to be 40 feet in this one instance, whereas the guy next door on the other side has it at 25 feet because you're making a left turn instead of making a right turn. Yeah, cut and dry is cut and dry, and in this case, there's really not much disadvantage to having a cut and dry distance there. The administration can always come back and say, we want a bigger sight triangle, and they can make that part of the review process. They can always come back and say that, but this doesn't give them the opportunity to say, no, you can have a smaller sight triangle. And, I think this falls in line with what planning has been telling us over the years. And like I say, when we reached back to that sign commission, this was, 10 or 12 people on that, spent the whole summer talking about all sorts of odd things, but very sign-specific stuff, and the sight triangle was a big part of that discussion as well. So that's kind of where this number came from, the more defined thing came from. And keeping it in the sign part of the ordinance is important, because if you're going to put up a sign, you don't want to have to look through the whole code. You want to be able to look in the sign part and then say what's going on. But I agree with what everybody's saying as far as their philosophy goes and things like that, but I don't think being less defined is a good thing for developers, is a good thing for traffic, is a good thing for safety. So.
Is there further discussion? Holly?
Oh, no, I was just going to move on to the next one whenever
Yes.
council's ready.
Amendment number A4, reducing short-term rental regulations.
So this is a fairly substantial amendment number A-4. And so this reflects discussions with administration talking about ways to scale back short-term rental regulations even more. It was based, and Crystal, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was based on, we still are not seeing, even with the proposed changes, we're not anticipating a flood of short-term rental owners coming into compliance with the code. And that is because some of these things that we're looking at actually do require and do place a heavier burden than anticipated. One of them, for example, inspections. Having to find someone to inspect your property and say that it complies with all of these things sounded easy in theory and hard in practice. Some of the other things are anything really where you're requiring signage. A lot of short-term rentals don't want to they're not running a bed and breakfast, they just want to be able to rent a room in their house or rent out their condo or whatever it is. And so this is sort of it peels back yet another layer while still requiring a local contact person and the health and safety measures that council had considered. So it's a more substantial consideration. To the extent council does not, I feel like these substantive, really meaty changes might be great areas for a follow-up ordinance, and that we'll talk about that with the overlay district as well. But this is an alternative, so it presents some of those amendments to council.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Holly, to clarify here, just reading through these again here, we're not necessarily striking the entirety of short-term rental here. We're still having a permitting process. We're just removing this version at least has some aspects of permitting process still involved.
Yes, it still has, it'll still be required. Ooh, that does remind me, I'm so glad that you said that. An important note is that as proposed, the short-term rental would be a conditional use permit in R1. And this removes that and makes it an administrative permit in all of the districts except for where it's prohibited in public and industrial, I believe. So that is a change, and that was based on where they are actually located. So I think what administration was trying to do is say, okay, this is happening, and council and the commission talked about sort of observing it before we start regulating it and seeing where it's happening. But if it's mostly happening in a district that it's prohibited in, or it requires a conditional use permit, then we're not going to see that move towards compliance that council was hoping to see. Is that a fair way to do that? So that is, but yes, Councilmember Crafton, you're correct. It leaves it intact in many ways, and we can walk through those.
Don't need to, I was just more so making sure I understand.
Okay. Then I absolutely will not do that.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you. The one issue I had here was with your paragraph 5 or bullet 5, removal of exterior signage requirements, essentially defining, who do you call if there's a problem? Because that's one of the issues that was consistently brought up when you talk about short-term rentals. They're having a party over there, or there's 17 cars parked in the street, and so on and so forth. Who do you call? And if you have to call the city after hours, to maybe be able to have a policeman swing by if there are, if there's nothing else going on, because this would be at the absolute bottom of the priority list for MAPCOM to handle. This gives me or you the opportunity to call an agent or an owner and say, hey, things are out of control at your rental. So I don't agree with the removal of the exterior signage. The interior signage I'm not too worried about, but the exterior signage I think is there, because typically it's placed on the house. Most places have a garage up front. That's where it's posted. It's not like it's out on the edge of the street or anything like that. But it says, what do I do if this is a problem? And the neighbors should be able to know who to contact when they do that.
That's an excellent point.
Okay,
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So with this one, if I were reading towards the bottom when you said if we wanted to make this motion, you want them done in individual numbers, if I recall. So for instance, if Mr. Graham wanted to leave that portion intact, the motion could be individually to strike everything else but not strike that section. That's how this specific amendment, what is this, A4 is being done, right? I think all the other ones are
Exactly.
basically saying, hey, you're gonna do everything in this section, whereas this one's like, no, we're gonna break out each individual numbered point. Did I understand that?
Exactly. I drafted it so you could do,
That.
you could do it as a
Okay.
whole, but
Right.
yes, I tried to draft each number in a way that you can propose it as a separate motion.
Okay.
suspecting that there might be some desire to take some of this, but not all of it.
Right, so if we wanted to say, hey, we want to do everything except that one that Mr. Graham talked about, we could leave that portion intact.
Yes.
And do everything else. Okay, just making sure I'm
Yep, that would work.
tracking this correctly. Thank you, Holly.
Okay. Moving on, amendment number A5, correcting format issues in the ordinance as a whole.
This is just correcting numbering and lettering. So I would urge you to adopt that particular amendment.
Okay. That's all.
That's all.
Okay.
Mayor?
Yes.
One other thing I would say is I do think the administration supported when we talked about it, bringing back an ordinance that repeals downtown overlay district. And so it was not proposed when we tried to formulate amendments from both administration and the attorney. That's not there, but that is because the thought was the process is more, we want to stick very closely to the process that engages the planning commission. We would be changing the zoning districts by removing an overlay district. That's a discussion that should happen in a traditional path. But that the administration would like to sponsor or support the sponsor of an ordinance that does just that. So as we move into Councilmember Crafton's amendments, I just wanted to bring that up because one of his amendments does involve that.
Page 316 of 647.
What was that, Councilmember? I'm sorry, we couldn't all hear.
316. Okay, page 316. Okay, Exhibit B is on page 316 of 647.
They're actually. Exhibit B starts on 164.
Exhibit B starts on 164.
The individual amendments that
Yes.
Councilmember Crafton wants to walk through. I think they're easy to read, starting on page 360. Does that make sense?
Right.
So if you're flipping through between them, if you go to page 316, it has the written amendments. And then if you go to page 169, in the comments, it'll say Amendment C-1, and C-1 will correspond with Councilmember Crafton's exhibit number 1. I mean, amendment number 1.
And my page numbers are of the 152. So the first one's page 7, so it's page 7 of 152 to help. Doesn't matter which one you're looking at, it should track the
Page
same
7 of
way.
152, okay. That's page 169 of 647.
So 160.
Line 202.
So one of the things I find useful is I have his page 316 next to, you know, the exhibit B, so I can follow them both along if
Okay.
that's helpful.
Okay, all right. Number 1 is line 202, and they want to change it from 30 to 15.
Do you want me to provide an explanation on all of these? Okay.
Please.
See head shaking. So this one here was, again, was mostly just to shorten the time frame on the administration. I didn't feel like it was necessary to provide 30 days if there's a change in interpretation. This could drastically affect somebody's permitting, whatever it might be, so we just said, hey, let's cut the time frame down to 15 days response instead of 30.
Holly?
Mayor, Councilmember Crafton, I know he's not surprised about what I'm about to say, but this is a change I do not support, or I would encourage the city to think very hard before you do this, because the time periods that are laced throughout the code are based on very specific balance between when often a meeting is going to occur, what happens if you say have a week where you can't get a quorum, or you have a meeting where you can't get a quorum, or you have someone on vacation for 2 weeks. What we don't want to do, in my opinion, is create a code that sets the city up to fail. Because while it is frustrating to have a permit that takes 30 days instead of 15 days, it's especially frustrating to have a permit that takes 2 years. And what we often find in cities that set really tight, very ambitious time periods is the administrative staff finds a way to make sure that that time period does not start to toll. And that is not done for nefarious reasons. I've seen it in numerous municipalities. It's done out of sort of a survival. You only have so much time. If you have 100 permits and every time an application is filed, it leads to this specified period of time, people find a way to start having conversations outside that permitting process. So I really encourage communities to pick time periods that hold the city accountable. Make sure that they, and often 30 days, 45 days, that is doing that, that is moving the ball forward, but also provide room for sort of common sense, real life performance, which is often a little longer than we want it to be, especially when it's based on where you have planning commission meetings, when on appeals where you have to deal with hearing officers or documents that are issued by others when it's reliant on others. So that's my spiel. I do understand Councilmember Crafton's effort to just make sure we're being as efficient as possible, but that would be the counter argument.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So this one is completely different from what Holly just addressed. This one is, and if you recall back to our conversation, I thought this entire section was unwarranted because I felt that if there's an interpretation of the code, that should fall to the commission, where it's a body of people that somebody's appealing to and not just a person. But in this case here, what we determined was if you want an interpretation from the planner, all the planner has to do is respond. She didn't have to give you the full spiel or make the final determination within that 30 days. It's just, all I'm saying is the planner needs to respond in some form of acknowledgement within 15 days, which is a little bit more of a reasonable time frame than 30 days in there, so that at least somebody's working on it and there's some type of determination being made, instead of waiting basically an entire month and your window of maybe trying to get a permit in or trying to get something done is basically gone at that point based on what our building timeframes are here. So I think cutting this time frame down so that our planner is making sure to get at least responses out within 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks is a little bit more reasonable, because again, we work for the people.
Crystal?
Yeah, through the chairman to Mr. Crafton, that is, in theory, a very simple way to look at it, but I can tell you some of the causes of delay are like flag poles. Do we regulate, how do we interpret what size a flagpole should be? And sometimes we have to go to legal for those interpretations. Very few people accept an email that says you can apply for this type of permit without some grounds of how I got to that decision. So in theory, single family homes and some of these other instruments we use to permit people, or how we interpret what kind of permit they would need to apply for, are pretty simple, and once they put that permit in, they get an automatic email that says, we received your application, it's in review. So that's automatically letting them know we've received it. It's these one-offs that will potentially put us in violation, and that's because we don't really have an interpretation for some of these requests.
And Councilmember Crafton, understanding where you're coming from on that, on this particular one, we could add words too, because I see what you're saying, and I did not interpret it that way. So I think you're right, you know, under a crunch, maybe somebody will. So you could say, who shall respond, and then add the words with the interpretation before in writing, and then keep the 30 days though. That would be my proposal. So it's you're getting the substantive answer, but you're giving them 30 days for the substantive answer.
I'd be more okay with that, knowing, because otherwise it's a little too open for interpretation.
Okay. So for the rest of council, if you're following along, if this comes up outside committee of the whole, on page 7, it would be, well, let's actually go to his number 1. So it would be on page 7, on line 202, add the words with the interpretation after the words respond and before the word in. Okay. Oh, and then it would be, and then you would take out the change 30 to 15, if this is the choice you want to go with. So it would just
No
be.
motion's been made at this time, so I mean, it's just
Yes.
more so me making a note to make the motion at this
Yes,
point.
I guess my fear is, I'm hoping that as you work through, while most of these are represented beautifully here, if you have the language, then you'll just move like, you know, you'll move very smoothly when it comes to.
Okay, number 2 on page 13.
Madam Mayor, we can move on from that one. We've already discussed that one. That was
Okay.
A1 in Exhibit A. That was the family portion. So we're on number 3.
Number 3 on page 20.
And Holly, this is one you had made a comment for me. I don't think they got the one that had the comments on this one. But this is where I brought it up, that the definition of pet and the definition of animal, domestic or domestic animal were basically identical. And so my thought here was just to say, hey, a pet is also a domestic animal and a domestic animal is a pet. So it's just pushing those two definitions together. And I think what you said here was basically just to strike pet in its entirety. So we don't need to put the word pet with domestic animal. Do you think it's just redundant at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with either approach, but turns out pet doesn't appear in the code. So this was one that was missed because we did try to go in and take out all those definitions that did not appear, and somehow this one snuck through. So.
My only thought was that, like, the average person doesn't call it a domestic animal, they call it a pet. So I feel like just adding the word pet there, so when somebody goes, what's a pet? Or they see the word domestic animal in there, and then they go look up the definition and they go, oh, that's referring to a pet. I think that's where it was just kind of a common sense thought on it. I agree with you, it doesn't make a difference, but I think adding just basically all we do is move the word pet to add it with domestic animal after wherever it falls.
And I think that's good when we look at Councilmember Rubio's sort of user-friendly litmus test. And what you're saying right now is basically it passes that test. So I have no legal objection to that. I think that's great. But if council doesn't do that, I recommend you remove it. So either
remove
adopt
it or put the word
Councilmember
pet with
Crafton's
it.
amendment, or yes,
Gotcha, okay.
or repeal the definition of pet.
What's that, Jamie?
What's domestic animal?
It's under animal.
Under
um,
animal.
Which is on page, it's under A.
Yep, 296 line.
Yeah, so essentially what I was looking to do was, sorry.
So I think we have to just go back to your
Page
original.
9 of 152 to find it. So it'd say animal, domestic animal, or pet. And then it would read the definition. That's basically what I had thought of. So all three of those terms could be used interchangeably. I'm seeing a lot of head shaking, so I'm gonna move on.
Which is reflected in Exhibit B, the change as stated.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to number 4 on page 24, line 755, add two-family before residential, so it reads two-family residential district.
Madam Mayor, so to Holly on this one, we made a lot of changes and you were wanting to change the way family is and two-family and single-family. My thought behind this one was you have single-family residential district and then you have residential district, which to me was conflicting information. I mean, I, as a real estate agent, know what R2 means. When I see the word R2, I immediately know it means two-family, basically. But duplex does not always translate to two-family because we also have a member here that wants an ADU. An ADU on the back of a property isn't always a duplex. It's considered a single-family with an ADU, and so that can, in theory, be two-family. And so that, to me, is kind of the thought process behind this. What it kind of clarifies is that R2 districts are districts that aren't primarily intended for single families. They're more intended for larger properties, but not going into the triplex, fourplex, large-scale residential. It's kind of the in-between, and to me, it just makes more sense because we have single-family and then multifamily right after it, so it clearly states this is what this type of district is for.
And this is one I really think, if there is a way to keep a list for preserving for phase 2, this would be the one. And it's not because I have any problems with what you're saying or how you're defining it. It's just that when we're looking at changing zoning districts, the courts and the code really protect that process, and it starts with the comp plan. So if we're gonna change our districts, and then R1 and R2 is never defined as anything other than R-2 in your code, and the definition and purpose of R-2 never reflects that it's designed to be two-family, although I agree with Councilmember Crafton. And so for that reason, I would recommend we do not change the name of any zoning district, or, which it looks like we wouldn't be doing because it says R-2, and why we did not define what R-2 is while we defined all of the other districts is somewhat confusing in purpose. In the purpose, we do not define it. So we define, by sentence.
But we kind of did in its intent. So I'm on page 34 of 152, if you wanted to follow along. And so if you read the intent of the district, it's in line with the title change that I'm trying to give it.
But I believe, and let me get there and make sure, but when I looked at your proposed amendment, I looked for that language that I thought would justify saying, oh, this is just an abbreviation, right? And I could not find that in the code. So when we go to R2,
Higher residential
It says-
density than either RR or R1. So it's saying we want higher density.
exactly. So what I'm saying is you're 1,000% correct, but what we are missing is in the intent or any statement, a reference to two-family. We have only the language as it is, and because we haven't had a comprehensive plan process, I do not, in my opinion, we do not have authority to go in and start changing the names of the districts. And so if we're going to, now granted, I agree, why call it R2? Well, maybe because it's the second district of residential, but maybe they don't want to put the emphasis on two-family, right? Because what it is, according to the code, it's established to provide areas for a higher residential density than either the RR or the R1 districts, which might mean, we don't know what that means because we're looking at higher residential density. So it may mean a change in lot lines. It may mean a change in setbacks, right? It might be density based on placement on the parcel. The zone may have some multifamily, which again would be more than two-family, and a higher density or different uses, but is generally a residential area with neighborhood commercial and some larger commercial uses. So I agree with you that having R1 be single family suggests that R2 is something other than single family, but we never changed the intent portions of the districts because that is the purpose of the comp plan. What will happen in the comp plan is they will look at all of the land use and development and priorities and goals, and that will come back before council. And I suspect given where other communities have moved, you will be changing your zoning districts. I don't know that, but I suspect you will. Just because there's a lot of creative, really we see with the multi-density districts and defining them. So I would not change the name of the district until you are free to change the purpose of it, or maintain the purpose of it, but you're making a determination on the district, which is outside the scope of this original effort.
Okay.
But I don't think you want to lose sight of those comments and those goals, because I completely understand. I think Councilmember Kraft is correct. I just think it's, for later.
Okay, we're moving on to number 5 on page 27, line 830, change 45 to 21.
And Mayor, as far as all of the days that all of them that get reduced, and I, of course, with Councilmember Crafton, like the last one regarding response, there might be some change, but I'm just gonna say on the record, I kind of have that categorical recommendation that you keep the days as specified in the code, except as otherwise pointed out.
So, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So to provide context as to where this one's at, this is after the Planning Commission has approved, or not approved, but made their recommendation for a rezoning. I'm just saying that essentially it really needs to be on the next agenda where possible. Whereas 21 days, I mean, the chances of us having another meeting within 21 days after them passing it is almost always, I would say. Trying to think of an instance where it doesn't happen.
Through the chair, Madam Mayor, asked me through the chair to the council.
Yes.
Just think of times we have cancellations due to, December, we don't have a meeting, sometime we just move.
That's about the only one I can think of.
There's other holidays depending on the calendar. Lots of times we don't have a second meeting in, Councilmember Graham, correct me, March. A lot of times May. Sometimes we're rescheduled to AML. I think the goal is always to get it on the next available agenda, but, they may not happen within 21 days, but it's a council decision.
So Holly, that would be my intention here, is to basically make it read that it's on the next available noticed one, which we did on another one here. So how do we, and we don't have to flesh it out right now, but I'm just saying that's kind of what I'm looking at there.
And through the chair to council, I would request next regular meeting agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And so I do see next regular meeting agenda a lot, but I also, there is a part of me that this is law, right? So, and that is not to sound condescending. If it's not within this time period, it's a violation of law, subject to penalties, subject to complaints, subject to, accountability. And so I like to have a number of days so that it's very clear. People can conceptualize the days, council can conceptualize meetings, people outside council conceptualize days. They live their lives within months. They don't even know sometimes that you have 2 meetings instead of 1, all of those things. And so that is why I would support just keeping the days, but keeping them, 45 days really does amount to having it at the next meeting with a cushion to have it at the next meeting. That's pretty much all you're gonna get out of a 45-day deadline. It's the most you're gonna get is having it at the next meeting.
Through the chair to the body. The other thing I just thought of is there are times, depending on complexities of issues before the council, I schedule things for agendas at different times. So it gives us that flexibility too, depending on what you had going. Maybe you don't want to rezone during budget.
Madam Mayor?
Just a thought.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
In all the instances where timeframes have been shortened in days, I do myself have a concern that we could end up being caught in time crunches that we can't meet because things happen. It doesn't mean that planning doesn't have to give an answer for 30 days. They can do it sooner. But I think if we shorten these timeframes, we're gonna end up in pinches and in trouble, because things happen, we end up without a planner, we end up without this, or you can't get a quorum. There's just, so many instances that can come up, that I think this, leaving the days the way we have protects us.
Madam Mayor. And also like what Holly was saying, or maybe it was Crystal, that the applicant automatically does get a response saying, we've received it, we're taking it under consideration. So I think that's good. I think that covers us. They know we're not ignoring them, and then we have the time, if anything happens, to respond.
And it is worth noting that some of these dates, if you shorten them, like one of the examples is a variance permit. So if you shorten it, and there's a provision that says if the commission doesn't enter a decision within, 60 days, I believe that the permit is denied. So it gives them the window. But if you shorten that, it impacts the permit applicant more than it impacts the commission. So variance is the only one that's denied with time. We have others that are approved with time, so you shorten it. It's a benefit, but it's a benefit if you're the permit applicant. It's not a benefit if you're an objecting neighbor, and suddenly that led to your voice being not heard. So that's the other reason. It was sort of a careful balance. Sorry. Okay.
I would just add to that, sometimes conditions are stated in the approval that they have to get additional information, i.e. maybe the fire marshal has to do an additional inspection. That's something that has come up because our roads were designed maybe when fire trucks were smaller than they are now, and so they have to have time to get that report done by another agency in order for it to have a complete packet for the council to review and approve.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I understand the desire to make government more responsive, or to appear more responsive than it currently is. I understand that, but in situations like this, I would really like to see how the lack of response by the government has harmed someone, as opposed to saying, well, let's change it just to see if it works. Let's change it because we see it did not work. That's kind of what I would like to see, so.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you. I think a little bit here's been strayed from the topic, because we're really only discussing here when something's been, or a rezone has been recommended by the planning commission and is now being handed up to the council. That's this time frame that we're talking about here. And so, again, by lengthening this time, there is the chance that we harm the public, because they have a timeline that they are working with, that they are trying to do something with. There wouldn't be just a general reason, I just want to rezone this because I want to rezone this. Most of the time we've done a rezone is because they're about to turn in a permit immediately afterwards, and they're going to go through a permitting process to do something. So again, this is to encourage that this gets done at an appropriate time frame. The rezone happens because a rezone can't happen until the city council's approved it. So that's where this is at. Again, as I mentioned earlier, some of these I didn't have full answers on. So again, I like what the clerk had mentioned, where it would be saying, hey, we're going to try and get this at the next regularly noticed meeting, I think is what we did on another one that I had. So thank you.
Mark.
Yeah, I agree with the statement. I think at least 30 days, because when I'm looking at my calendar, when Planning and Zoning meets, the Zoning Commission, they meet on like the 9th of December, and the next time we don't meet until after that would be the 6th of January, if you look at these previous calendars. And that doesn't give us 21 days to answer that call if that comes in after their committee meeting.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to read this real quick, it says the request for rezoning shall be submitted. So it's not saying we have to have our meeting. All it's doing is saying that once the Planning Commission has approved it, said, yes, well, they've made their recommendation, excuse me, that it then gets submitted to the council so that there's not a delay in the submittal of it, whereas technically they have 45 days before they're even required to submit it to the council.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Rubio?
I like the idea of giving that grace period of keeping it the 45 days. It's not broken, don't fix it. At the same time, you know that everybody's working to try to get it where it needs to happen at the next meeting as soon as possible. But again, putting the city at a point where we can't hit that deadline is definitely not what we want to be doing here, right? So I like the idea of keeping the days where they were at. Like I said, I don't think that it has caused any harm. And administration and everybody working on it is still working on it to get it done as soon as possible. But we do have that grace period.
Okay. Moving on to number 6, on page 66, line 1782, change 1 to 2.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So this is, and I realized too, looking at this, I think it's technically 2 changes, Holly, that we need to make here to, if this one were to go through, and that'd be back on page 65 under D1. I think it's no more than 2 people as well. But the idea behind this one is, as we discussed around home occupations, basically, to give an example, is the person that cuts my hair does it at her home. She has a building that was built on the property, and she has 2 parking spaces. The person she's cutting her hair for can be there waiting, and she allows one other person to be able to pull up. The way this code states is I would have to continue to drive around the block until that person leaves. So all we're doing is saying, hey, you can have 2 people, you can have the person you're working with, and the next customer in line is there waiting for you, ready to go, instead of them circling the block waiting for them to leave. Are we gonna sit there and police it? No, but I mean, if you get a neighbor that wants to sit there and call every time it happens, it just says, hey, look, like, they're not causing a disturbance by having 2 vehicles there waiting, essentially. So, and again, Holly, I think there'd be 2 changes. Did you find the one I was talking about?
2 on 1782.
We can work that out later. It just
I
dawned
think
on
we
me.
have the intent. The other thing,
Holly, turn your mic on, please.
if there's some of the changes are really substantial, so if we end up with just a few word changes, that's fine and you can move forward, but some of these larger changes, that's an opportunity to, if we state in the amendment, unless the city clerk has a problem with that, if you state the intent to change it from 1 to 2, as located on this line and elsewhere in the section, I think that's legally sufficient anyway.
For you to make the changes.
And then we can
yeah.
go back and make sure I'm finding that second 1 to 2.
Okay. Moving on to number 7, page 75 to page 78, lines 2060 to 2176, strike everything. This is to remove short-term rentals from permitting to a licensing process.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we could probably breeze over this one. Again, my intent was to do basically what they had done. I think the administration did it a little bit better of a manner, but in all honesty, I'd like to see it just move to licensing, which I think we've already discussed this one enough, so. If the council has further questions, I'm moving on. Madam Mayor?
Mr. Crafton?
Sorry, I was waiting for you to read it, but number 8 on page 82 there. This one here I felt like was a little bit too much of a burden on our businesses. Basically, it states that if a road gets paved and their parking lot's not paved, that they're then required to pave it. Essentially, I just didn't feel like this was necessary. If you're not paved, you don't need to pave it at that time.
And I have no comments on this one, that I would just defer to the administration if they have some.
Yeah, currently, there's no way for us to be checking these. We can barely keep up with the brand-new driveway permits coming in. So I would say that, there's no way we have been keeping up with this current code. But we do, when we do our new permitting through Citizen Serve, state that any new approaches do have to be paved at a minimum back to the right-of-way or property line. So we catch them when they do apply for a new driveway permit on an existing paved road.
So that would be not under this provision, basically. It's under a different aspect at that point.
Okay, and I do know this provision came from the Public Works Director specifically. I mean, looking for this support for the paving and because of the impact it has on the roads and the pavement over the long term, yes. Oh, so that's, I mean, just again, I have no, legally, it can be in, it can be out, but that gives you as much information as we have, I think.
Yes, and I guess since we're almost done with all the paving projects out there, that this would become into a need to get into compliance by going back and trying to get some of these older driveways that aren't paved and are spilling gravel out onto our paved streets. So maybe that was Eric's intent, but I apologize, I was not involved in that.
Madam Mayor, I would say that this is an example of something where we are, creating a harm to our citizens and to our businesses by making them go and do something else. Having the approach paved as part of it is one thing, but going in and paving a whole parking lot is something totally different. I mean, that is indeed a measurable harm to a business or to an individual, in the case of a residential property. So yeah, this is adding regulation for the benefit of the government, but not for the benefit of the populace. So I would agree with Mr. Crafton on this.
Madam Mayor? Sir?
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you. Just a clarifying question, make sure I understand this. First, thank you, Mr. Graham. But we normally, when we pave streets, neighborhoods, whatever it might be, we usually do the little apron into that section too a lot of times as well, don't we? I think it's a case by case, but a lot of times we end up paving a small section anyways.
So we usually do on all residential driveways that are not paved, a 2-foot wing out.
Okay.
And that's a breakaway for the structural section not be harmed.
And it helps the road from getting degraded anyways. I mean,
all major approaches, we try to do an apron.
right.
Like, on roads, or I'm trying to think of other examples, but the major ones we do try to, the streets, to give an apron.
Thank you.
Okay. Number 9, page 83, under 7. He wants to add, snow cannot be pushed, placed, or stored in the right-of-way or in the site triangle. Not sure where it would go.
Madam Mayor?
Is there a line number for this?
It's number 7.
So there's not a line number, but it's under 7 on page 83 of 152. Basically, it talks about snow storage, and so, oh, sorry.
2329 to 2330 is where we ended up putting it.
There you go, thank you. So, I'm not 100% sure this was fully necessary, but one of the things that I found happens very often is snow gets pushed into the site triangle. And so we end up with a lot of places where you're creeping out, trying to get out of a driveway or a parking lot or something. And so this just clarifies that it really can't. I mean, when you look at the definition of site triangle, especially now that we really took a few minutes to talk about it, I mean, to me, it's clear that it's not supposed to be. This just kind of clearly states it as well, that it can go in there. And so I can't remember where Holly ended up trying to put it, but again, this is one, I'm not trying to over-regulate, but to me, it's one of those that it is just a clarification that snow does count as something that can't be put in the site triangle.
Yes, I have no legal objection to this. This is, I did place it under snow storage, which is in section, let's see what the, so it's in parking and it's in 166520 E7B. And that is lines 2329 to 2330. And that's just where we had the snow language. That language is language that the council expanded upon in this draft, to try to just make sure we're actually regulating for where we live.
Okay, we're moving on to number 10, page 105, line 2935. Add are required, so it reads landscape plans are required for commercial. And on line 2937, strike everything from must to the end of line 2939. This removes the provision of requiring a landscape architect.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. Basically, this was to not require a licensed landscape architect. I know there's at least a request for an amendment by the administration to strike the word administrative permit. So I think there is a little bit of a difference between our two amendments. They're just stating that they don't want it for administrative permits, administrative permits. I'm saying it's not needed for all of them. What I think we're still going to see happen is when you have a large-scale development, you are not going to end up doing the landscaping yourself. You're going to hire somebody one way or another. All we're saying is that you're not required to have it's not a forced licensed landscape architect. To give you a good example is if you have a big box store come in, they don't come in and do the landscaping themselves. They hire somebody to do that. And so they're gonna do this anyways. I'm just stating that it's not required at that point.
And just to add to Councilmember Crafton's comments, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when we went through this, I think this is what, similar to your short-term rental moment, the administration liked your amendment. Thought this amendment was a more precise way to do, to take that, to refine the landscaping requirement without having to, start over with introduction. That said, I have a note here that basically this change is of a nature that's substantial enough so that if council adopts the amendments tonight, this particular amendment, then we'd want to see the ordinance with the amendments incorporated into it come back before council for final adoption with one more public hearing. Because under the case precedent, if we make a substantial change, we need that extra public hearing.
So far, is this the biggest substantial change?
Short-term rentals. Under the A1 amendments, the only amendment that was made in Exhibit A would be the short-term rental amendment. That would need to send it back. And so far, the only amendment, and if you change all of the dates, I think you'll be okay because that places the burden predominantly on the city. So I think that one's okay. I think that this change really changes landscaping requirements substantially. So I just think we're best to go back. So far, that's the only one though.
Page 107, line 2983. Strike everything from native trees until 3 trees on line 2987.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, if I recall correctly, Holly, this one was carried over from the current one. But my thought behind this is if you want to use natural vegetation, you have to go get a tape measure, one of those bendable ruler tape measuring things, and go measure all the trees on your property to determine what counts or not. Is there a way that it still needs to be registered? Somehow, yes, but I think this is really burdensome for people, and I just don't agree with how it's put in here right now. Regardless of if it was existing or not, I just think it's way too burdensome, and this is the type of stuff that people were coming to us complaining about, was this type of provision right here. And so could it probably be worded differently so that it makes more sense and it's easier for people? Probably, but I think one way or another this small snippet needs to go.
And so, and just to note, one of the things, this was actually added to give them a credit for native trees. So if you have a landscaping plan and you have what's required, if you have native trees that fit a certain size, then you get a credit that's equal to 3 trees. You know, so we see these types of things, but I don't disagree with Councilmember Crafton that it's a lot of words, and now you've created a credit system based on trees, and that might be more complex than why our council wants to see this go. So I have no issue with deleting that language, but I just want to be, clear with
Madam Mayor.
its purpose.
And this doesn't remove them getting credit. All it does is saying you don't have to go measure the trees. That's all this says here, is that you don't have to take the tape measure out and go measure trees. You're still going to get credit for native vegetation. We do want to give you that capability. I think that's the right thing to do, because it encourages people from clear cutting, but it just doesn't force you to go measure, which to me that's the burden here.
So Councilmember Crafton, I don't think I effectuated your intended amendment then. I'm sorry, but I think we have to take a minute, because I took out what I left says that they promote a sustained presence of trees and woodlands, but there's no, hey, if you have native trees, that's equal to 3 regular trees. I've taken that out here. So, did you want to keep sort of healthy native trees shall be credited as 2 trees for the purposes of complying with the section? Or maybe 3, that takes out the measurement but keeps the credit?
Sorry, one second, I'm rereading this one more time to make sure I'm tracking you here.
I just don't think I did what you were intending.
Give me a second. No, it still reads that way, because the specific portion that you're thinking of, starting on line 2983, healthy native vegetation within the required landscape and bed area may be used in place for any or all of the required landscaping. And that's the key component that still offers natural vegetation as a credit towards landscaping. Basically, my intention is to remove the measuring of trees.
Okay, so.
And that's captured correctly.
So the way it reads now, they'll have to follow the requirements, right? They can replace native vegetation for other vegetation. The way it read before, they actually could have less native vegetation in exchange. So if they had healthy trees, native vegetation of a certain size, that was worth 2 of the same of a tree, and if it was of a bigger size, that was worth 3. Mm-hmm. So and that is, I think the purpose was to incentivize the use of the native vegetation, not just support it. But here, I've taken out that, but I've also taken out, so there's the native trees shall be equal to or greater than the minimum size requirements, so I took that out too. So there, I guess an alternative would be, and I think you can take all of that out, and we're just basically saying we support the use of native natural vegetation, but what we've removed is the incentive. But if nobody can understand the incentive, if those references to caliper and size are confusing, then maybe it's not gonna get used anyway. So I'm not trying to discourage council from adopting this amendment. I just feel like I was not, I just wanna make sure that Councilmember Crafton, it reflects what you wanna do.
So I have a question about the term native trees. So are we talking about trees that are native to Alaska, or are we talking about existing trees? I mean, we've got an awful lot of existing trees that are invasive species, but as I read this, and maybe I missed it someplace, we're just talking about existing trees. Doesn't have anything to do with native plants, is that?
No, it's an excellent question. So native vegetation, we do define it, and it means dense stands of forest, including trees and shrubs that are naturally occurring in the Matanuska-Susitna Valley. And so this was one of the things that council really wanted to see. They wanted to see that we weren't talking about another part of Alaska. We were talking about what's native to Alaska, and that we were trying to keep landscaping, but just define it in a way that made a little more sense for council and the planning commission. So that definition is on page 18, so page 180 of your packet. And then we do have, but Councilmember Graham, what you're thinking of is one of the things we talked about was what about existing vegetation? So I think you're kind of tapping into that conversation which council had, and we added another definition for existing native vegetation. And so that definition is existing native vegetation means existing vegetation prior to any clearing, including trees, shrubs, and other plant species that are either indigenous to and or occur naturally on the site. This includes vegetation that could have been expected to have been on the site prior to any clearing. This includes forests, wetlands, meadows, or any other undisturbed and undamaged vegetation. So we're getting both. We're just trying to cover. We're not gonna make you take out the natural vegetation and put in something that is not natural vegetation, which I should say is happening under the current landscaping plan. That will not happen based on the revisions. Does that?
It doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy, but at least it lets me know what you're thinking, so.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. Something just to note on this is it does state healthy native vegetation within the required landscape bed area. So this isn't actually just, oh, I didn't cut that area over there, so that area counts. It's specifically referring to the areas that would have been your landscape bed area. So this area over here needs to be landscaped. Well, I didn't touch that, so I don't have to now, type of thing. But it doesn't mean, well, this is my landscape bed area, I'm gonna cut this down, and because I didn't cut this stuff down over here, it counts. So it still is kind of defining that, hey, we're going to try avoid concrete and asphalt wastelands, and people just not cutting down the back of their property and saying, hey, my landscaping's back there. Like, that's the other thing that this still holds true. To me, this is a hard balance of we want people to landscape and not create wastelands of asphalt concrete, but we also don't want it to be burdensome. So I think this helps a good balance. It's just, again, my idea behind this is to remove people going out and measuring trees to try and get it to a certain amount, so.
Okay, moving on, number 12, page 109, strike lines 3043 to 3052.
Sorry, give me a second. I'm trying to make sure I'm in the right spot here.
It's line 3045.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm tracking, making sure I'm remembering what this was. So what this was essentially trying to get away from the aspect that we are going to tell you exactly how the landscaping has to be done. So it goes back to the aspect that if we have small landscaping requirements, they're gonna be able to landscape the small areas that they want, and we're gonna call it good. If they're going to be coming out and hiring a landscape architect for a big business, you know, think about like Walmart's parking lot, for instance. They're gonna hire somebody, they're not gonna do it themselves. This is them not having to go, okay, well, I have to go and make sure we're meeting all of these little individual requirements. We're just saying, and which is what the administration has some other amendments around, is we're looking for a percentage. We want a certain percentage of your property landscaped, and that's the goal. If you can get that to us, great. And that's what this removes, is that aspect of trying to define anything beyond telling them it's a certain percentage.
And I would just add, the administration did not have any issues with removing these. That's just,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Number 13, page 110, line number 3076, change 4 to 5.
Madam Mayor, sorry, it looked like your deputy administrator / acting planner
Yeah,
had
I
a
just
comment on
wanted
that.
to also give some validation why we supported that, is we have seen up to 2 years of delayed construction because the availability of what we require is not available, or it isn't growing fast enough, or it's really, really restrictive. And so our goal is to not hinder 2 years to get a commercial building built.
Okay, now we're moving on to number 13, page 110, line number 3076, change 4 to 5.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. This just states 4 units is still a residential property. And so basically what I was saying was that residential properties didn't need to jump through all the hoops still for landscaping. This states that when you reach the commercial level of development, which is at 5 units, is whenever it starts to be required.
We have no problem with that amendment. From a legal or administrative perspective, we don't have an issue.
Okay, moving on to number 14, page 111, strike everything from lines 3117 to 3120.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So this is one of those that I just felt was a little of an odd situation. Basically what this states is that as a residential property owner, you have to go measure and make sure that if you have 100 linear feet fronting the road, that you have to leave at least one tree up in the front of your yard. And so I just thought it was a really odd provision to require to measure to make sure, and for every 100 linear feet that you have that one tree. Again, to me, landscaping is more of a commercial thing than it is a residential thing. What we have in here for residential property owners is don't clear cut, which I think to me that's enough of a provision. This becomes a little burdensome because now every property owner has to go, how much linear feet do I have on the frontage road? And measure it and make sure they have the proper amount of trees.
And where does it say not to clear cut?
It's a different section, I'd have to find it here, but.
And I think just to Councilmember Crafton, just to answer that, on 168040 C1, so really the only standards we have for residential are, as Councilmember Crafton stated, an anti sort of clear cutting. So what that says is retention of vegetation, and for lots less than 40,000 square feet, 15% of existing vegetation must be retained per residential lot. For lots equal to or greater than 40,000, 20%. This number, the administration derived this by pulling up satellite imagery of the residential zones and looking for where we saw compliance and where a lack of compliance, or where you saw a real impact if if those numbers weren't met. So what they found, I think, you were in that meeting, yes. So, yeah, and Eric, so I think that it really was, I think we saw maybe 2 or 3 lots total, looking at those where it was like, they might be pushing it, but, for the most part, the lots were meeting these requirements.
To go on that then, so that's what you did find, and that's where the 15 and the 20% numbers came from?
Yep, so that's where you've got your 15 or 20, yes, that's where those numbers came from, if that's helpful.
And there you go, Mr. Graham, right before it. So, because I felt like 10 or 15 for small lots were what did feel a little high, but if that's what you found, then I'm okay with that.
Well, and it's something to watch too, if you find that, because I do think, and there was discussion about, are we seeing people come in, looking, what are we seeing for development? And generally in Wasilla, people were leaving 15% or 20% on their lot. They were, more than generally, it was the vast majority. So it might be a good starting place, but a great place to flag for phase 2 too, to see if that really ended up putting a burden that was unanticipated.
I would think maybe in phase 2, we could include a phrase in here where we're talking about existing vegetation being retained, that the planner can approve a plan for revegetation, that doesn't necessarily keep the same vegetation that's there. So that phase 2 sort of thing.
Makes sense.
I'll make a note for that so we can make sure we have that in them.
Okay, number 15 on page 118, line 30. Oh. Did I miss one? Okay.
Just a number change, so this would be.
Okay, this is
3357.
another time change from 30 to 15. It's line 3355.
So to provide some context on this one is after an application's been completed. Keep in mind, this one reads business days, so it is 2 weeks. If you count 30 business days, that is over a full month of time. That's 5 full weeks, 6 full weeks, excuse me, before an administrative permit is issued. So maybe 10, what did I put on here? Sorry, I wrote down 2 different things. So I cut it in half, so it's still 3 weeks for an administrative approval being issued.
To Councilman Crafton, I would just say that about 70% of the applications we get in are missing some component of information. So it really becomes a conversation of, can you get this to us? And a lot of it is they just they don't understand the application process in the beginning. So they'll just upload the same site plan for every single attachment. And so we have to go back and then what are you really asking for? Until we get that complete application, then we can do the entire review process, which means Public Works looks at it, Finance looks at it, Utility looks at it. But that initial packet doesn't go for circulation until we've got the completed package. And if people are home and they have that information, it works really fast. Mm-hmm. But if we have to try to get a hold and they have to try to figure out where they can get a current as-built, it takes a little bit of time.
So one of the reasons why I was okay with this change was because it says after receiving a complete application. So what you're saying is that the application's not complete. You didn't give me everything I needed. I'm asking for more information. So technically the application's not complete. The other portion that made me okay with making this change was the planner may postpone the issuance of a permit up to an additional 30 days. So there's still the aspect of allowing the planner more time in here if need be, or the planning department, we'll call it, more time in here. But for those administrative approvals, which I call are the ones they're the people that check all the boxes and they fit inside the nice square box. They're the easy ones. So let's move these ones along out the door. We still have the capability to extend, or you just say, hey, sorry, it's not a complete application. So that clock has not started until you've completed the application.
And that's one of the benefits of this online system, that we can see exactly, you can track the timeline, and You can look at the notes to see exactly. We have an application right now where, you know, we hit a 30-day trigger because they didn't have a current as-built. They kept giving us an as-built that didn't include certain additions that we had given variances for. So it's really our responsibility to make sure it's complete and to verify. Trust but verify.
Right.
And one of the things I don't want to see the administration doing is claiming that something is not complete. Not that, I'm not saying that you're doing this, but having a reason to claim that something is not complete in order to stop the clock from running. So this is one of the things that we were worried was happening under the current code in the city of Wasilla, that people were engaged in talking back and forth in the process but weren't getting somewhere, and it wasn't a matter of months. In some cases it was much longer than that. So 30 days is, you know, that gives a planner time to meet and consider that application received with all of its pieces complete, even if you have to go back and get the as-built adjusted so the city's held accountable.
We have 6 amendments that are just time changes. So is anybody interested in changing any of those?
I think it's fair.
Besides Mr. Crafton.
I think it's fair to talk them out because each one is an individual reasoning behind it.
Okay. We are, number 16 is on page 119. Strike everything from line 3393 to line 3431.
Madam Mayor, we've been at this for 2 hours. Could we take a 5-minute recess, please?
After we do this,
Sounds good, thank you. This one here is referring to site plans. So if you're getting a site plan, there's a certain way it's required to be done, and we don't need to codify how that's supposed to be done. And so all it says is we want all of these certain things on it, and that's what those things kind of already exist on there. So I just did not feel like this was, the way this, our code explains it, was necessary here.
And you said they already exist where?
So whenever you have an as-built survey done, there's a certain way that as-built surveys are supposed to be done by the state, and so that's the way that they're licensed, stamped, sealed, everything. It's kind of like a landscape architect. There's a certain way that they're required to do this by the state, and so we're just reiterating it at this point.
I actually own a couple of pieces of property that don't have as-bills, and I have no intention of ever doing that. Of course, you know, I mean, unless I need to develop it or something like that, but not everything has an as-built, particularly here in Alaska and particularly in the Mat-Su Borough where we're still kind of the wild, wild west. I mean, what we're trying to make sure here in Wasilla, we're not part of the wild, wild west. You know, if you want to live in the wild, wild west, live in the borough. If you want to live in a place that's, you know, predictable, live in the city of Wasilla. But I don't know, I'm not familiar enough with state law or state procedures to say that that requiring a site plan is a bad thing. Because a site plan may be an existing as-built, but if I draw something out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and take it to the planner, you know, it shows where north is and shows the existing things there roughly, and the planner can look at it and say, oh, by the way, you gotta have a 25-foot setback here, and, you know, that sort of thing. I do agree this does place an additional additional burden on the property owner, but I don't think it's an unreasonable burden.
Mr. Graham, just to clarify, I'm not removing the requirement. All I'm doing is stating that we don't have to explain exactly what the site plan's supposed to do when that person's already supposed to do that. So the requirement's still there. I'm just not saying it has to be in legible ink, it has to be in English, you know, to me, it felt like a redundant thing. To give you a better example that helps me here is there's another section of this code that says the city's gonna provide a form, and that form has to include X, Y, and Z. The city's gonna provide the form, end of story. And that's kind of where I'm at with this, is, hey, we require a site plan, and approval of the site plan already exists in here. So if we deny the site plan, then we can kick it back to them and say, hey, I need you to fix this.
But don't we have to deny it for a reason? Don't we?
So this is, I mean, this does remove the requirement. I mean, we have a very clear requirement of what has to be in there, and the city has the option to have a site plan. You know, some places have site plans that are just sketches, you know, and that's all they require is we just need you to sketch out what you wanna do. And maybe that's what the city wants to do. But we do require that we approve the site plan, you know, when a site plan is required. So I think what that's Councilmember Craft is saying, that requirement for a site plan in the sections in which it was required remains. Yes, okay. And so, and what this is doing though is, you know, and again, you can take it out. It's unusual to have no parameters, and so you don't have that uniformity. And the reason why is when you're telling somebody no, and you're telling someone else no, or maybe you're telling someone else yes, when you're looking at a similar document, it leads to uniformity and consistency. So here, the site plan, you have the specific information now, but it is a lot of information. This can be waived for single family and duplexes. I believe they also do not have to have a engineer certification anymore, and we even allow it to be waived otherwise, but it requires planning commission approval if you're gonna waive a site plan requirement otherwise. Or a site plan, let's see. So there is a provision that council that we talked about and added that was a waiver, just to make sure there's a way to deal with special circumstances.
And I would just add, we don't tend to see a lot of pushback of a site plan. Where it becomes really more of an engaging conversation is if they don't really want to tell you what they're doing. So this is an accountability component of, we may have this conversation in 5 years with somebody that just bought your lot, and if we haven't done our due diligence, then there's no value in coming to planning.
And finally, the other thing is we have really reduced when site plans are required. You know, because by eliminating an entire layer of permitting, so you're back to an administrative permit, that really eliminates anything. We were trying to eliminate anything discretionary, right? And so when council and the commission went that direction, one of the things that happened is we are not going to have them produce a document that requires discretion when you review it. So there's usually a site plan is really only seen in permits involving conditional use permitting.
And you'll see that in Soldotna, if they're building a fourplex in Soldotna, they'll have one section that says draw a site plan or attach an as-built, and then on the bottom it has a list of all the things that you're going to say you've complied with. So you're not having to upload all those documents, you're just having a disclaimer. So if we come out there on an enforcement side, we say, well, you had this disclaimer that you had that. So it really puts it on them, and I think that's the direction what we are going towards.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So, I mean, the way I'm reading this is the site plan is still required. Like that's what I want. I mean, I'm not saying we don't want it. All I'm saying is out of the countless as-builts that I've seen, site plans, whatever you want to call it, they've never not had these things. And so all I'm saying is we don't need this in our code. If you're gonna go get, because it says unless otherwise provided, it has to be stamped by an architect. Those architects are gonna have all of these things already put in here. So all I'm saying is that, hey, let's cut down the code a little bit and just not have to codify this section of it. That's where I'm going with this. I still like the idea of it being required for certain circumstances. I think, and again, unless otherwise provided, so If we come along and it's a situation where the planner wants to say, hey, all I need is a drawing on a napkin, go for it, you know, but what we're saying is now you have to go out and get all of these things put on here. You're gonna force somebody to hire an architect, whereas they might just be able to draw it on a napkin. So.
Madam Mayor, is that on? Madam Mayor, through the council here, this is kind of a checklist. Some surveyors aren't equal out there, and sometimes you get a piece of paper with just a north arrow on it, a driveway, and a septic and a well. And we get into these conferences that we go to and start going through the plans, and, you know, oh, you need drainage patterns on there, you know. So this is more of a comprehensive checklist to make it straight across the board that they at least go through these 13 steps and at least check a box somewhere. So it's important to, even though, yes, that you get some form of an as-built, to get it more comprehensive, because we've seen all flavors out there at these meetings.
This is one I wouldn't recommend removing without work. And the reason why is, you know, we went through this code and the administration sat down with legal and we went through it with the planning commission and we went through it with the, you know, in these joint sessions. And the uniformity of the site plan and what it looks like and where it applies, I think all deserve to be considered as one if we're going to change it. I think that council should adopt it or not adopt it, you know, with these provisions. But that said, there are a few things that I think that would not apply to, and the reason why is I don't know what's lurking, right? We remove all of these things, and I don't know what member of administration who's working with site plans is saying, are you kidding? The council struck the document that we've been using that everybody's familiar with, that, you know, that to me has far-reaching consequences. But if you want to strike the paper that it's on, right? If you want to strike that provision, Councilmember Crafton, you start with the part that says it should be prepared legibly in ink in the 11:14 format. We see that in most codes, you know, that specifying exactly how they want that to be displayed, and in part because that creates a different presentation of the information. But legally, I'm not worried about that having consequences beyond its own, beyond the four corners of this section. So that is, and the fact that it's prepared in standard English engineering scale of 1 inch equals 50 feet or less, you know, again, that assumes that everybody is building to the same, or providing the same scale, but it's very easy to see that's all contained there. We're not gonna get a lot of different documents, or if we do, administration can come back to you where there's no hidden issues. The other thing that I think can be isolated is the engineering stamp requirement. We've heard a lot of talk about that. And right now, single family and, I'm pretty sure it's single family and multifamily. Let me find our duplexes. Let me find the reference. Yes, so single family and duplexes may be prepared, the site plan may be prepared by the owner of the property or their designee. So I think if council wanted to extend that, change that, even delete the requirement that it be prepared and stamped by an architect, professional engineer, or land surveyor. You know, if that's something you want to do, again, we could see that here. And if the administration finds that that's creating problems, they can come back. I mean, how does the administration feel about that? I'm not saying that you like those things, but.
Madam Mayor.
No, the administration does not like those things.
So what I'm hearing is policy, and there's a balance between, we don't codify the policy. There are certain policies that the administration adopts, and that's what this sounds like, is hey, we want it done a certain way, and so the administration can adopt a policy on how that gets done. But putting it in here does not sound necessary then. What's going back and forth here is the administration likes it a certain way. So great, create a policy on how it's done, but putting it in here is not necessary at that point.
So with this one, I want to see it in here, you know, and the reason why I want to see it in here is I want every human being and developer and property owner in Wasilla to open up your code and be able to say, I know what the rules are. And nobody's telling me that the rules for me are different than the rules for somebody else, and nobody's telling me that I can do it on a napkin, but so-and-so had to put in plans. And I am not saying, and that is not meant to take aim at our administration at all, quite the opposite. That is what the administration's trying to do here. And I think council, and I think it's, you know, we've done so much work on this code. Those original objectives, you know, make sure it's clear, everybody has the same playbook, everybody's playing by the same rules. Those were council's directives early on, you know, something that was important. And I think if that is truly still important, laying out criteria in the code, you know, and I think we'll see it later too, like in permitting, where you're telling people up front what's gonna be asked of them, what rule they have to follow, and then making sure those rules are very specific and don't have very much discretion. Most of the time, there's a little discretion here. Again, there is they could waive it for, but most of the time, if there's discretion, it goes to the commission. So we've removed almost all of the discretion that rests with administration. And that does not mean, Councilmember Crafton, you won't choose as a body to infuse it back into your code eventually, but I think the goal was to, you know, was to start from a base of same rules.
I don't see how, without a site plan, how do you know where your corners are? How do you know where you're gonna put a building? Is it 2 foot over your property line, or is your neighbor's 2 foot over, or whatever? It just causes a lot of havoc, my opinion. Okay, we will take a 5-minute recess. are to number 17, page 123, starting at line 3504. Strike everything from the application to line 3525 on page 124.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. So this is the one I was kind of talking about earlier where, and to me, the way I look at this one is it's a little bit more of a policy thing. Essentially, we're gonna provide you a form, and the form can have basically what you want on it. My concern is that if you codify the form, if you wanna change the form, you have to change the code. And so to me, if we just say, hey, we're gonna provide you a form, we can put what we want on that form, and just keep it simple as that.
Yeah, and so this one, I don't feel as strongly about this one as I feel about the last one, but I do think we should keep it, and it's for the same reason. You know, when I am applying for a conditional use permit, or I think I might want to buy a piece of property and that may require a conditional use permit, I can look at the code and I can see what is required to be in that form. And there may be other things in that form, but these things are not going to change without a change in code. And so that's one reason to keep it. Now, you know, you can take it out, but I also think this also includes, it keeps uniformity in the form. So land use where people's property rights are at issue is much uniformity and transparency and lack of discretion we can have while still doing what you're trying to do. We need the fluidity and flexibility to get, you know, for property owners to get where they're trying to go. But this is, we're gonna expect everyone to give us their name and mailing address of the owner. We're gonna know we have that information for the applicant, which might not be the owner. We're gonna have a legal description for the property, and it's not just gonna be a shorthand description. We know we have what we need. We are gonna have the site plan prepared according to the title. And if anybody says, I did have a complete application, or we can hold true to these criteria. So that would be my argument for it. But again, if you take them out, your code will still stand and it will still be solid, and it'll probably be like 2 pages shorter because all of the permits provisions are throughout the code.
Okay. Number 18, 19, and 20 are all time changes. Does anyone want to change this? Those three don't.
I'd be interested in just hearing the staff report, so to speak.
Nikki, what about you?
Oh, I haven't got there quite yet.
They're all on the same page, if that helps.
Yeah, right here. I'm just seeing which ones they were here.
Page 126.
Still waiting on me?
Yeah, I'm waiting on you.
Oh, okay. I haven't looked at this, see, number 20.
Okay,
Let me look at number
this
20
group
real
over
quick.
here don't want to change the time.
I would say no. I haven't, like I said, I haven't read 126 yet.
Okay.
Line 3591.
Okay.
Okay, in the event the commission
Then-
fails to act within 60.
We are moving on to number 21 because it's 4-2. Page 126, line 3595 needs to be changed back to a majority of total commission. I am not sure how to word this.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you, Mayor. Holly, I think you had some comments around this one, but basically, the way this reads, if there's 3 members of the planning commission at a meeting, it only takes 2 of them to approve or deny something. Which, to me, it doesn't matter, it's a matter of what the total commission is, so to me, it should be always a majority of the commission.
Yeah, so this one was, we actually talked about this one in the past. I'm not sure if council members remember, but we did talk about this. And the reason why we changed it, so when the commission is sitting in their quasi-judicial capacity, they're sitting almost like a judge. And they're making a decision based on the evidence and hearing from both sides. And so it is completely appropriate to maintain a majority of the commission. But when you have 5 commission members, that often means a delay in a decision, or can mean a delay in a decision, because you can have, let's say you have 4 members there, and then you have 2 members with a conflict of interest, or they know somebody, right? It doesn't take much out of 5 to end up where you cannot get a majority of members. You may have enough for a quorum, but you don't have enough to hear a decision. The other thing that happens is you have enough there to hear a decision, but it's a decision that has started at a past meeting. So if you have very complex issues, that will happen, which doesn't happen very often right now. So I think but that would mean that commission member would not be able to issue a decision. They're not going to be able to deliberate because they weren't there for the hearing. So this just keeps it flowing. It means that so long as you'll need a quorum for a meeting the way things are set up. Technically, you don't need a quorum for a hearing, right, for a quasi-judicial proceeding. But the way we're established, you would have a quorum. And if for some reason the amount of people that are hearing, so you have, say, 3 commission members, then you just need 2. It's also the feeling often by applicants that they have to get a unanimous decision from the body when it gets down to those lower numbers tends to lead to a lot of appeals. And that's just in my experience, like I have to get a unanimous decision. And so there may be one person who disagrees, and there's no room, there's no room for a difference of opinion between the decision makers. So that is why I propose changing it. It's to mean it makes sure that there's never a situation in which a person can't get their
And I have some data.
hearing. But I am fine with it. And this does work with the Title II language.
Yep, and through the chair to Councilmember Crafton in particular, the one thing I didn't really think of in terms of a quasi-judicial, on the other side of the house, when we have a hearing officer, that's just one hearing officer making rulings. So certainly a council decision, but acting in a quasi-judicial capacity is different than a legislative capacity. And so I really see it on our appeal side of the house where we just have one hearing officer ruling, one person ruling. Just wanted to add that.
Madam Mayor?
Nikki,
What? Oh, I think I accidentally.
Mr. Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm okay with the understanding that when you don't have enough qualified people, that makes sense, but the aspect of being present there is not justification. Because to me, that's, no. You should, if you're disqualified from voting, understandable, but you shouldn't be changing how many people it takes to approve or deny a permit based on how many people are present there. Those are 2 different pieces that should not be put together at this point here.
Madam Mayor, I would agree with Mr. Crafton on that. I mean, as a commission member, you have a responsibility to be there, and if you have a declared conflict of interest, then you should be disqualified from, or you shouldn't be counted when you're looking for a majority of the members. So if there are 5 commission members and 2 of them are disqualified because of interest, problems there, conflict of interest, then it's down to the 3 people to make the decision. But it's way too easy to convince somebody not to show up to a meeting, to get your goals met. So especially one where it's not an elected body and so on and so forth. So I agree with Mr. Crafton. I think it needs to be a majority of the commission, excluding those with conflict of interest.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
So question to Holly here. So it says approval of the conditional use shall require the affirmative vote of the majority of members of the commission present and qualified. Would we just strike the word present and just say of the commission, majority of the members of the commission qualified to vote at the hearing at that point?
Exactly.
So that's all
That
we
would
would
work.
need to strike to basically do what Mr. Graham and I are talking about.
Yes, that's all you would need to do for that one.
Okay, we're moving on to number 22, page 127, line 3638 shall read, PUD development plan shall be submitted to the city planner on a form provided by the city, and strike everything from line 3640 to 3673.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you. This is going back to what we were referring to as number 17. It's essentially the same thing. It's just saying, hey, we're going to provide you a form, put it on the form. Everything else is, what's on the form is policy at that point.
And I think I'm gonna agree with what our attorney said before. I mean, if it's on the form and it's defined in code, then everybody's playing off the same playbook, as opposed to, well, Crystal's the planner now, but, we decided Bob's gonna be the new planner and Bob changes the form. Nothing personal, Bob, but,
To Commissioner, Councilmember Crafton, I think it's just a semantic of, it's not a form, it's an application. So we don't have forms, but we have applications.
Okay, moving on to number 23, page 135, strike everything from line 3877 to 3887. Mr. Crafton?
Give me a second here, Mayor. I'm just making sure I'm gathering my thoughts correctly. This one was more of a question. I don't recall seeing anywhere in the code that we even had the right to take a guarantee. Now, I understand that the previous code has that, but is this in here because if we have one, we need a way to release it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, we have guarantees for subdivisions only. So, and that subdivision, that process can be different, and there can be development plans, and that's where the guarantee comes from. And we did not touch subdivisions. For the most part, we are preserving that for after phase 2. So we did separate them out, I believe, to make sure that we are dealing with them properly, but we did not change the substance, and that's why I do not want to take out the guarantee, the release of the guarantee, because the subdivision improvement process, when you're looking at the development agreement process, and it's a whole other ballgame, and it technically falls outside land use. When we're looking at subdivision, it falls into sort of the realm of platting, but it's an area that we have taken on. So the Matsu Borough has given us that extension. So the Matsu Borough also is engaged in the subdivision review and approval process. And so we have met with them. We have talked to them about the things that we do for subdivision approval procedures, but I think that's something you'll see come before you once we know what our.
Sorry, we got sidetracked there. So you're saying that we have a place in our current code for taking these when it comes to subdivisions?
Yes, so you have development agreements, and so the guarantees here have nothing to do with guarantees elsewhere in the code for like landscaping or those types of things. The subdivision process and the public improvements upon subdivision processes and the other improvements that may be, so that when you have a subdivision, the development of that subdivision really isn't just about the private developer, because you're talking about public utilities, you're talking about public rights of way and access points, and so all of that turns into a conversation that often involves a development agreement, often involves guarantees for certain things to be provided that serve the public, right? So you have the subdivision creates a space that the public navigates. I think that's maybe the best way to think of it. So when we require something of them, or the city engages and does something, we need a release of guarantee. So this is a preliminary acceptance after installation must be in writing from the council after written approval has been received from the engineer. This is applying to the acceptance of improvements. So you might have somebody build a road, you know, you have utilities going in, you have all types of things like that happening in a subdivision. So we don't want to take the release of guarantee out. This is a much different process than when we're looking at guarantees for land development by an individual, because we want it to look pretty. The only other place we really saw it, and that's not fair. That's being facetious regarding our landscaping plans. But we were requiring bonds, and we were requiring certain landscape, we were requiring that our landscape plans meet certain criteria, and if they did not, then there was a bond and then a release of a guarantee in the bond. This is different. We are accepting improvements. We are working with the developers on the development of those subdivisions, and we need the release of guarantee language, and there will be guarantee language most likely in a development agreement. Is that helpful?
Madam Mayor, if I could just kind of also talk to that. So currently with water line extensions and sewer extensions, we get big bid guarantees and bonds on that stuff. And that goes through a state process through ADEC for approval to construct and approval to operate. And we don't release those until we get those approvals to operate. And that ensures us to make sure those public facilities are safe and went through the engineering process and approval through the state, and we're still good to then move on with our permits to operate those. Subdivisions, the only teeth I really have is to accept it for maintenance. So if they don't check all their boxes and put the proper shoulders on or pave it to a certain standard, then I can say we're not maintaining that for you guys at this point in your development. So those are the only three things I can think of. So I don't know how it all ties in exactly with this part of it, but that's from operations, that's what I see.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Crafton?
Thank you. I think the rest of these don't need to be talked about since they're basically reiterations of some other stuff. So we can move on to the only last question I have is to the downtown overlay at this point, which I don't think we've fully covered that one. So that's my final one at this point here.
If I could address that.
Go for it.
So it's my intention to do away with the downtown overlay district. And when that happens, the property will return to its previous zoning, which is a zoning change, and that would happen by default. You know, without the council's approval, it would happen by default. However, I do think, from talking to several people, that it is I think what they called it is a substantive change to the title here, and therefore should be handled outside the title, should be handled with its own ordinance, so to speak, and then go through the planning commission process and then come back. So I intend, not at the next regular city council meeting because it's too late, but the council meeting after that, to submit an ordinance, which I would expect the mayor would refer to the planning commission, and then 60 days later, whatever, it would come back. But the idea there being do away with the downtown overlay district. I just would like to hear the attorney weigh on this, but I just don't think this is the appropriate forum to do that, to provide the appropriate public process.
Yes, I agree. It's a significant change to go through the steps. So that is perfect. If you guys, if you consider it as a separate ordinance, it won't be a difficult ordinance to draft. So, and the way that, if this title passes, if this ordinance passes, it is separated out to its own division, its own, so it can just, I believe you would be able to remove it, those parcels would revert back to commercial, and that would be the one change. But again, that's a substantive discussion for ideally a separate ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Crafton. That was my thought on that.
Madam Mayor. Question for Holly at this point. I mean, I understand where we're going with going back through the public process here, but we've heard quite a few members of the public come before us over the last couple months talking about the downtown overlay. The administration's come before us and told us about the downtown overlay. They've had comments, they put a memo in as well, commenting on it. And I mean, I've lost count how many people I've talked to about how bad the downtown overlay is at this point. So just because there is another one in here that would be a substantial change that you said would require or should warrant another public comment, wouldn't it basically, let's just say we did do it tonight, removed it. Wouldn't we just say, hey, we're not passing it tonight and we're gonna push it back before a public ordinance again at that point? Isn't that how that would work?
I think it's gonna change. I think it's gonna change what you need to do because of the planning commission involvement that we're going to need to have on that front. It's gonna have to go back, but I think what we could do is we could build that in to the effective date. The other option is you could amend it to repeal that section, and that might slow the whole ordinance down. I do think you would need to go back out for introduction. I think we would want to follow, because you're repealing a zoning district, we'd want to follow and be very consistent with what we do when you have a Title 16 provision with a substantive change, especially one that's generally taken on during comp plan process, right? So we're doing it a little bit differently, but here we've had joint meetings with the commission, and this is sort of, and from what I've heard, I suspect you will have support from the commission, so I think the other thing that you can do is repeal it as part of this ordinance, and put that change in, and then I will work on the effective date language, because I think we'd have to start and go back and go through the planning commission and come back to council. But those changes are gonna need to go before the commission anyway, so, I mean, I don't know. Jamie, do you have a preference?
Through the chair to the body, to Attorney Wells, how about if, when we're out of committee of the whole tonight, how about we skip, the council just simply makes a motion to refer that to the planning commission? So it comes up from the planning commission to them.
So you put all, I don't know why I'm struggling with this tonight, I'm sorry. So you'll put all of the changes, and including, if this happens, a repeal to the downtown overlay district, but we follow the process that we refer it back so that it follows the process for,
I think the repealing of it should be completely separate from this. I was just looking at titling.
Oh, okay.
But it starts with them. And so presumably it might be faster up to us, but totally separate ordinance, Councilmember Graham. Its own thing.
Oh, so you do, okay, so you were thinking of this ordinance without a repeal to this, so it doesn't sound like you would support putting the repeal of the overlay district, adopting that as an amendment to this
Well, I mean, you're the
ordinance.
attorney. If you think
No.
we're good, we're good.
It is not my preferred method, but I also, you know, I mean, I think keeping them separate is important. I also think you might be surprised what happens with when you're repealing the overlay district, you know, and so I want to make sure that discussion, once the commission weighs in, that discussion is separate, it's important.
Because if the commission weighs in, may I just speak freely? If the commission weighs in and it comes back up through council, it doesn't have to go back again, so it's a 2-meeting.
Yes,
I mean,
so it is, and that's an excellent
I
point.
think it may be a faster track.
So is the mayor able to direct the planner to put that on the next commission meeting? And then that way, like you say, it comes up from them. And we assure that process gets started because it's directed by the administration.
If that's something, and I think the administration supports it. Absolutely. So, if that works.
Yes, that works.
Because I think, Holly, the way I see this, if through the chair, if I may take liberty here, because we have to rerun this back through public hearing, if the changes we make tonight would be the 28th, when we could potentially adopt what's before us.
Yes, and that's public hearing, so I think with the zoning district, I would want to see a introduction.
Correct. So then at that
that's-
same meeting
yeah.
would be hopefully introduction of a repeal of the overlay, and then first meeting in August, public hearing and action by the council to repeal the overlay.
Sorry, just for clarification here, so, well, because the next planning commission's meeting tomorrow, if I recall correctly, actually. Hold on, I'm just looking at a calendar here thinking. So they're meeting tomorrow, so the 28th of July, you're saying we'd have the introduction because on the 22nd of July, the planning commission's going to discuss it. I mean, they're more,
If that's the
or
calendar.
you're just saying we're introducing it because it's an ordinance? I'm just trying to
If that's the
understand.
calendar, Councilmember Crafton, then I stand corrected. Council would introduce it on the 25th and adopt it on September 8th, if that's the timeline, based on the calendar and when the commission meets. Now, the commission could be, yeah, it's not gonna, because they're scheduled to meet July 22nd. Our meeting packet for the 28th will publish on the 23rd, so that's too quick of a turnaround. So it would be introduced on the 11th of August with action, public hearing and action on the 25th, which is light years for us.
It also allows, you know, one of the things that we need to look at when we're considering that ordinance is the comprehensive plan language. It's my understanding, and I wasn't here at the time, but I believe the comprehensive plan really landed on the downtown overlay district. So a lot of that language feeds directly into what we see in the downtown overlay district. So when we're doing that ordinance, one of the things that legal will need to do and with the administration is make sure that to the extent all of those properties are reverting back to commercial, there isn't an unintended violation of the development that was sought in the comp plan, right? And so we're making sure we get that language right. So it will take a minute. It is, you know, the ordinance should be 2 sentences, you know, so that's great. But it will take a minute to make sure that that is all that is needed, that there's nothing else that we need to change in how the commercial district is applying those properties.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to, come out of committee of the whole.
Madam Mayor?
I'm sorry, before we exit committee of the whole, the memo that we received from the administration for recommendations, most of them have been touched on, but I just wanted to ask our deputy administrator if there's any other comments she wants to make, because I see one of them is reduced minimum parking standards I'm looking under the immediate proposals. If you would just speak to them for just a moment. And that's on the whole packet, it's page 321 of 647.
Through
the chairman to Councilperson Cottle. The request here to reduce the minimum parking standards is, continues to be a very hot topic for these new developments because the minimum requirements that we have for certain classifications, especially some of them in the downtown overlay, are pretty difficult for them to meet. And so we just need to have a little bit of flexibility where we can have a little bit of latitude there. We also have in the parking standards that they have to, they have 1 year to say it's a new building, they have 1 year to pave it and get those parking spots striped and be in compliance, and it's been problematic. So that is something we repeated to hear from the developers, is to have a little bit of flexibility in those minimum parking standards.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kraft?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, thanks Kathy for bringing that up. That was what I was gonna say. I wasn't gonna leave. Is that something that the planning commission should take up, that we could also refer down to them as a, hey, along with the repeal of overlay, could you look at what changes to, because again, I think for the conversation for purposes right now, it's too much of an undertaking. But if they came back as well with a few changes like that, I think that might be, if the council's okay with that as well, I think that'd be a really good thing, is saying, hey, here's some changes to the parking that we'd like to address as well.
Yeah, we have a nice schedule that we can use as a visual to discuss. It's been a while since it's been updated. So we have, for instance, we have new businesses like quick service restaurants that have no inside dining, they're just drive-throughs. And so we need to address some of these new industries that are coming in and update that table.
Madam Mayor, so if we could have that on the next planning commission agenda as well, that would be great, discussing the parking changes. And then I had another question too on that memo as well. Did we discuss number 3, size landscape requirements to encourage new development and consider seasonality? I don't feel like we discussed that tonight, and I was curious kind of what that was meant, because I mean, it's under the immediate changes to 2514 that you're referring that to, so I'm curious what you meant by that.
Yeah, so our intention here was that in the new plans that we have received as part of the application, the accessibility to like the plants that they have to buy, we give them a really tight, once they plant the vegetation, we have from May till September to basically go out and do an inspection. And so we just have to consider that we may have a really easy winter, or we may have a really hard winter, but if, say, last year we didn't have a lot of snow, things melted really quickly, we just have to have some flexibility there, that we're not gonna say you have to have, you know, inspections have to be from May 15th to September 1st. It may not even happen till the middle of June. We might have to go till the end of September. But there is a seasonality there that comes with landscaping, and sometimes they can't even plant until June. So there's a really tight timeline in our code right now that they basically got 3 months to plant it and have us inspect it. And so we just want to have a little bit of flexibility there.
And I think I remember reading that section. I had some concerns around that one as well. And I think usually what I've seen when it comes to code is it says it's usually within 12 months. So it says, hey, you basically have a year to get this done, so that, you know, just because you're in the season right now, the problem is you could do this landscaping right now, but it's not going to take, it's all gonna die off, and then come next year, you're gonna have to replant it because it's too late in the season. There is a balance of like, just because we're in the window doesn't mean it's actually makes sense to do this right now. So I'd be curious to see what you had to, what your thought was on changing that. And then the last question I had was on number 2, if you still felt like that needed to be changed or removed.
I think we addressed that earlier. Yeah. 16025. And when we're talking about tree heights, I was really glad you brought that up, because we had one really nice new development here in the city that was delayed 2 years because it could not get the trees at a certain height. So,
And so I had called, because I had concerns around the caliper, I think the new one's 1.5 inch and 5-foot trees. And I called, because I was curious, I know Alina and we had conversation out here at the dais about that, like, hey, I just called the landscaping companies and said, hey, what, like, do these numbers make sense?
Yeah.
And from what they told me was they said, hey, actually, if you go any smaller than that, you risk getting trees that are too small and are not going to survive. So there's actually a balance there. And I was like, oh, this number actually makes sense now at this point. I think it was 5 foot and 1.5 inch caliper come in hand, as that's about the diameter of the tree whenever you buy it at 5 feet. And anything smaller than that, you risk not surviving the first winter, usually at that point. So normally I wanted to get rid of it, and I was really on board with removing it until I made a couple calls, and they were like, actually, no. If you allow people to go smaller, my fear is that they're gonna do that, and then the first year they're gonna be really upset when they find out that their tree didn't survive.
Or if you have a winter with lots of snow, I mean, we have a really nice business here in town that had, we had a big snowfall and the snowplow came in and he said, I practically stood out there with Christmas lights on saying, don't get near this tree. This tree is the most expensive tree on my property. And the snowplowers don't care. They're just getting the job done as quick as they can, so.
And normally I'd be like, I don't like the idea of it. I mean, and we have the provision for maintenance now too that says, hey, if your tree dies, you need to fix it. I think it's the first 2 years is when we're really focusing on it, is making sure they fix it. But also I think what that does, leaving this in here tells them, hey, if you plant this minimum size here, there's a really good chance it's actually gonna last through the first winter at that point. Whereas if you go any smaller, it's not gonna make it probably, and you're gonna be having to replace it the next year. So why not just spend the extra money, extra couple dollars, and do it now? So I think that's something that needs to be left.
And just to add to that, Councilmember Crafton, it's the maintenance and replacement provision that, that Crystal and Councilmember Crafton are talking about. It's the fact that, you have to continuously maintain all required landscaping, but if something happens and it's substantially damaged or destroyed, it has to be replanted. And the language now is within the same growing season that the damage or destruction occurs, or no later than June 30th of the following year, whichever. Whichever is earliest, meaning if the damage happens in winter, you have until June 30th in the upcoming year. So that was an attempt to sort of provide some buffer, but it may not be enough. It sounds like that might be an area that will be coming back for amendment.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to exit committee of the whole.
Madam Mayor, I move that we exit committee of the whole.
Is there a second?
5 seconds.
The motion's been made by Councilmember Crafton, seconded by Councilmember Cottle to exit committee of the whole. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, we are out of committee of the whole at 8:55. There. Okay, do we want to continue this to the next one? Okay, is there a motion to continue this to the next scheduled council meeting?
And so, yes, I took the liberty placing it on the agenda for next week, the 14th. And so at that meeting, do you want to make your amendments? And then we'll schedule it for public hearing on the 28th. Or Attorney Wells?
I have just one suggestion. There are only a few substantial changes that were made and discussed during the committee of the whole. The other changes can be made at the meeting, so they weren't so substantial as to require that second public hearing, right? So maybe it would be best if we're looking at continuing it to take up those amendments first. So if council approves those amendments, even if they postpone the ordinance with those amendments, we can have the ordinance with those adopted amendments in the packet, so it's getting the second hearing on those substantial changes.
In the packet for the 28th?
Yes.
You want those, so you want them to adopt them tonight or next Monday?
Well, I mean, I guess, so that would be adopting the amendments, at least those substantial change amendments tonight, if they're gonna adopt them.
Okay.
And then we'll have the rest of them, we can decide if, I mean, and who knows, maybe that needs another, but I think this gives council a shot at having this adopted at the next meeting.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, could our attorney remind us which ones those are? Just because I think there was one of mine, and then the rest of them were from the administration, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
Yes.
The substantial, short-term rentals and the number 10 on Exhibit B and A. Oh, short-term rentals is on Exhibit A.
And the site plan on Exhibit B. I'm sorry, not the site plan, the changes to landscaping plan on Exhibit B. Yes.
Okay, so we are voting on, we need a motion to accept the substantial short-term rentals on Exhibit A and number 10 for Exhibit B.
So do you want to do through the chair, if I may, through the chair to
Yes.
the council? Holly, would it be two short-term rentals are dealt with in A3? Motion to adopt amendment A3?
Of
Or
Exhibit
short-term
A.
rentals above it?
A4.
A4.
Oh, A4, yes, and I would refer to, and all of the changes identified with it in Exhibit A. I mean, then that just makes sure that we have a really clean.
Okay,
But
Jenny, you
yes.
state all that.
Okay, so the motion, if you're interested, sorry, Councilmember Crafton.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Crafton?
I move to amend ordinance 2514 to make the changes included in A4 that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 as identified in amendment number A4 Exhibit A to the attorney memorandum dated July 1st, 2025 related to short-term rentals. So basically, it's everything except the one that Mr. Graham had pointed out about the exterior signage.
Okay, and number 10 in Exhibit B?
Let's take that separately.
Okay. Is there a second?
Graham seconds.
The motion's been made by Councilmember Crafton, seconded by Councilmember Graham. On the motion of A4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7. Is there a further discussion?
Madam Mayor, I propose a secondary amendment to delete item 2 from that list.
What is number 2?
The site plan.
Item number 2 deletes the site plan requirement for the short-term rentals.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Is there a second?
Hearing none, it dies for lack of a second.
So hearing none, it dies for lack of a second, so we are back to the original motion. Is there a further discussion? Hearing none, is there objection to the motion? The motion is approved. Okay, now, we are on to number 10 in Exhibit B, which is...
Madam Mayor, do you want me to read the motion?
landscape plans. Mr. Crafton?
Sorry, I just want to clarify with our attorney here. Did you want me to read it off as I read it, or did you have something that you wanted to clarify around it first? Are you trying to find it?
Because for some reason I'm having a hard time getting back
316
there.
of 6.
Thank
Page
you.
105.
Oh my gosh, I would have been turning for, okay.
267 of the packet.
267 of the packet.
Oh, 267, okay.
Well, I was just referring to where I wrote it out as on 316.
16.
So the way I have it here is, I just want to make sure that we have the same language. $29.35. Everything else. Okay, so if you refer, these are the right, we have the same lines, Councilmember Crafton, so you can say as identified or as exemplified or whatever word you want to use on line 2935 through line 2941 on page 267.
So I'm going to read it as read? As I have,
Yes,
okay.
so just, and then you can say that because there are some. I think there might be slight differences in, capitalizing and underlining.
I
and
think
so-
that's Scribner's error at that point, yeah.
Okay.
So Madam Mayor,
Mr. Crafton?
I move that we amend ordinance serial number 2514, page 105, line 2935, and add are required, so it reads landscape plans are required for commercial. And on line 2937, strike everything from must to the end of line 2939.
Okay, Councilmember Crafton, now that you've read it, so the way that I think there was no need to add are required. So all you have to add, it actually effectuates what you want to do if you just say landscape plans must be submitted to the city for commercial developments with a gross floor plan of 5,000 square feet or more. And you know what I mean? Because you're specifying.
What she said, Madam Clerk.
So, okay.
So I think we can say, motion to amend section 16.80.020 from line 2935 through line 2941 as identified as amendment C-10 on page 267 of the packet. Yes? Okay. Councilmember Crafton, are you okay with it? You want to
That's
look
my
at it
motion,
first?
Madam Clerk.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mark, the motion has been made and seconded to whatever the attorney said to the clerk. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, is there objection to the motion? The motion passes. Okay, now the rest of it, we will,
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Crafton?
I move that we postpone ordinance serial number 2514 to the next regular scheduled city council meeting on July 14th.
Rubio seconds.
The motion has been made and seconded to postpone ordinance serial number 2914 to the 2514 to the next scheduled council meeting on the 14th. Is there objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Okay, now, there's no new business and there is no audience comments. So, we will bring it back to the dais. No, he's with her. He don't want to talk.
Jamie?
So, Madam Clerk,
Just really quickly, I know council discussed directing having the mayor direct the administration to bring an ordinance ordinance. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't forget about that if they wanted to actually do that.
So through the chair to Attorney Wells, I don't know that, does the council motion required?
I mean, we were-
No, I think the mayor
Oh, no.
can, I think the city planners heard what the council wants, but we
Okay.
can certainly do it by motion.
It does
won't
not have to
hurt.
be by motion.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure
Yeah,
it was.
thank you.
Okay. Madam Clerk,
See you next Monday.
Madam Attorney,
No comment.
City at, oh,
No comment.
whew. Anyway, Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's nice to have your clerk or intern here tonight. This should pretty well convince him that he doesn't want to go into the municipal government business as an attorney. But I did want to address something that Mr. Claperick brought forward. He said, you know, I feel like by identifying myself as a non-resident of the city, my comments or his comments are not as important. And I don't think that is correct. I can certainly understand that perception, but I think when we identify persons as residents of the city, we have a better understanding of their motivation for participating in the public participation, whereas someone who is not a resident of the city is perhaps more likely not to have the best interest of the city at heart, but only the best interest of themselves or their industry or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that about Mr. Claperick. I've known him a long time. He's a friend. But every piece of testimony is important, and every piece of testimony to me receives equal weight. But I make a note when people talk whether they're a resident or not. So if it's a really close call, for me, and we had, 5 persons who were residents talk, in favor of an ordinance, and 5 people that were not city residents talk in opposition to an ordinance. Well, obviously, I think the city residents are going to take their comment is going to have more weight with me than other words. So, but every comment is important that you make, whether it's to the city council or the borough assembly or the state legislature. Everything is important, but knowing where a person comes from, I think is important. And if we continue to identify persons as residents, I think that's appropriate here for the city council. So thank everybody for being here tonight. It was interesting. Thanks.
Councilmember Cottle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll see you all on Monday.
Councilmember Beelock.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and it was a good meeting, and I'm kind of, when I first came, I think when I was on the planning commission, the district, overlay was very popular, it was, oh my gosh, we're going to have a downtown, we're going to compete with Palmer in that way, because everyone loves to walk around Palmer, and we did have some high hopes, and I think it got kind of waylaid with rules and regulations or whatever, but I have to say that I am for removing it, even though I was excited 10 years ago or whatever, but anyway, so I think that is a good call. And we'll see everyone next Monday. Thanks.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree with Stu on the comment with, giving more weight to the residents, but I think maybe we should add some verbiage of having a business in Wasilla as well as being a resident of Wasilla. So I think they should have weight because they own a business and they're collecting taxes for our city that runs our city. But anyways, it was a very good meeting, and I look forward to next week.
Councilmember Crafton.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 things I wanted to mention. First, and probably more of a question to the mayor here. The comments by, I believe it was Bethany, that come forward about the parade here. Curious as to why she would come forward during public comment as an employee of the city, and why we wouldn't have that under a commission or agency report at a regular meeting. I felt like they were great comments. I'm not trying to downplay them at all. I just felt like it would be something that would have been a lot better coming forward at a specific time then coming forward as what a time that's meant for members of the public to come forward. I feel like that would have been better warranted under our public, or was it agency and commission reports there. I felt like that's where she would have done really good there. So honestly, I would like it if she came back at the next regular meeting and made those comments, because a lot of times people tend to watch the regular meetings more than the special ones, because the special's about something specific and they're going, oh, Title 16 doesn't matter to me, I don't care, I'm not gonna listen to that meeting, whereas the regular meeting might be something different. So just to comment on that one. And then the other thing I wanted to add was, I know the council didn't really want to discuss the time frame adjustments I made, but I would really recommend you look at them. Some of them were very interesting, especially the ones we actually didn't talk about. Mr. Graham said he wanted to at least hear me out and see what I had to say. I would take a minute and look at them, look at what I put forward and look at what they say. Some of them are a little odd as to why is it that if they have a certain time frame to make a decision, there's another 30 days after that decision, or if they have a certain time frame to make a decision and they choose not to make a decision in that time frame, why is there another 60 days before it's approved or denied? Shouldn't that be the following day that decision's then decided, instead of giving people more time? So to me, it was just very odd how some of this was laid out. And so I would say definitely take a look at those timeframes there and look over, read them, because like I said, to me, I understand there's a balance we have of making, we don't want to put too much stress on the city and create such short time frames that they can't meet them, but we also don't want to give the option that the time frames go so long that it becomes a detriment on the resident or the business owner, whoever it might be trying to obtain that permit. We want to respect their time as well. So thank you all, and very good meeting. I appreciate all the conversation. I mean, I wish we would have been done tonight, but I think we're really geared up and ready to knock this out next week. We'll see you next week.
Councilmember Rubio.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Great meeting tonight, and then just wanted to give feedback to the city. I did get a lot of people say that the parade and the picnic were amazing, and the weather just happened to cooperate perfectly, so I was in Seward and not here, so the feedback was great. On that note too, the 14th, the meeting, I will be calling in, just so we all know. Don't forget about me on the telephone. Thank you.
Don't get a mute.
You better speak up, you know. But anyway, thank you all for your time. Hopefully, we are going to put Title 16 to bed at the next meeting. This has been a very, very long process. So I think it was very well warranted, though, the process. And we have got people that are willing to come and build in the city now, because we have worked on Title 16. So with that,